In the opening moments of Elden Ring, we hear perhaps one of the most iconic lines in From Software's entire catalogue. A mysterious narrator speaks words that will echo throughout our entire journey. Rise now, ye tarnished, ye dead who yet live. The call of long-lost grace speaks to us all. These words, spoken before we've even created our character or taken our first steps into the lands between, establish something profound and deeply puzzling about our protagonist. We are told, in no uncertain terms, that we are among the dead who yet live. But what does this actually mean? This single phrase has sparked countless discussions, debates, and theories among lore enthusiasts and casual players alike. Are we literally dead? Are we walking corpses, animated by some divine force like the hollows of Dark Souls? Are we undead in the traditional sense, cursed to walk the earth without rest? Or is something far more complex happening here, something that speaks to the very nature of death, divinity, and resurrection in Miyazaki's meticulously crafted world? The question becomes even more intriguing when we consider the mechanical reality of playing Elden Ring. When our Tarnished falls in battle, struck down by a Crucible Knight's devastating combo or overwhelmed by a pack of basilisks in a dark catacomb, we don't simply reload from a save file in the traditional video game sense. Instead, we awaken at a site of grace, our body completely restored, our spirit renewed, ready to face whatever challenge struck us down moments before. This resurrection isn't merely a gameplay convenience, a concession to player frustration or difficulty balancing. It's woven deeply into the fabric of the world's lore, connected to ancient pacts, divine interventions, and the very structure of reality in the lands between. The game itself acknowledges this mechanic through item descriptions, character dialogue, and environmental storytelling. Our ability to return from death is not a break from the game's fiction, but an integral part of it. As we delve deeper into this mystery over the next several hours, we'll discover that the nature of Tarnished Resurrection touches upon some of the most fundamental aspects of Elden Ring's narrative. It connects to Queen Marika's grand design that spans millennia, the role of the Greater Will and its cosmic authority, the function of the Erdtree as more than just a massive golden tree, and even the tragic history revealed in the shadow of the Erdtree expansion. The answer to whether the Tarnished are truly dead and being resurrected will take us through the deepest corners of the game's lore. We'll explore everything from the cosmic machinations of outer gods to the intimate tragedy of a Shaman village hidden in shadow. We'll examine the mechanics of grace, the infrastructure of sites of grace, and the fundamental nature of death itself in a world where Queen Marika removed the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring. What makes this question particularly fascinating is how it reflects Miyazaki's approach to storytelling through mechanics. In previous From Software titles, resurrection mechanics were often tied to curses. The Dark Sign in Dark Souls condemned the bearer to endless cycles of death and rebirth, slowly eroding their humanity until they became hollow. The Dragon's Blood in Sekiro came with its own terrible price, spreading dragon rot to those around the protagonist. But in Elden Ring, resurrection seems to be presented differently. It appears as a blessing, a gift of grace that marks the chosen few who are destined to become Elden Lord. The golden light in our eyes, the guiding rays that point us toward our objectives, the sights of grace that dot the landscape like beacons of hope, all of these suggest something holy and benevolent rather than cursed and corrupted. Yet as we'll explore, this apparent blessing may be far more complex than it initially appears. The Tarnished occupy a unique position in the pantheon of From Software protagonists. Unlike the chosen undead, whose curse is immediately apparent and central to their identity, or the good hunter, whose transformation into something more than human is gradual but undeniable, the Tarnished's relationship with death and resurrection is framed in terms of calling and destiny. We are beckoned by grace, promised lordship, called to greatness. Yet we share with our predecessors from other From Software games this fundamental separation from the natural order of life and death. We exist in a liminal space, neither fully alive in the conventional sense, nor truly dead, like the skeletal warriors who rise from graves throughout the lands between. To understand what the Tarnished truly are, we must examine not just the mechanics of resurrection, but the historical context that created them, the divine forces that sustain them, and the ultimate purpose they're meant to serve. We'll need to trace the thread from Marika's ancient banishment of Godfrey and his warriors, through the long march that scattered the first Tarnished across distant lands, to their eventual return in the Age of the Shattering. The mystery deepens when we consider that not all Tarnished seem to share the same relationship with death. Some, like our protagonist, appear to possess an inexhaustible ability to return from defeat. We can die thousands of times, each death a learning experience, each resurrection an opportunity to try again. But others, like sorcerer Rogier, gradually lose their connection to grace and eventually face true, permanent death. What distinguishes these different types of Tarnished? Is it a matter of will, of divine favor, or something else entirely? Furthermore, the shadow of the Erdtree expansion has revealed new layers to this mystery, providing context about Marika's origins and motivations that cast the entire Tarnished phenomenon in a different light. The discovery of the Shaman village and the revelation of Marika's tragic past suggest that the creation of the Tarnished may have been part of a plan far more complex and emotionally driven than we previously imagined. As we begin this exploration, it's important to remember that Elden Ring's lore, like that of all From Software games, is deliberately layered and often ambiguous. The developers provide us with pieces of a vast puzzle, but the complete picture must be assembled through careful observation, interpretation, and sometimes educated speculation. Multiple interpretations can coexist, and the journey of discovery is often more rewarding than any single definitive answer. The question of Tarnished resurrection touches upon themes that resonate throughout the entire narrative: mortality and immortality, free will and destiny, sacrifice and redemption, love and loss. These are not simple questions with easy answers, and that's precisely what makes them so compelling to explore. In the sections that follow, we'll examine the mechanics of death in the lands between, tracing how Queen Marika's removal of Destined death fundamentally altered the relationship between life and death. Fundamentally altered the relationship between life and death. We'll explore the historical events that created the Tarnished through Godfrey's banishment and the Long March. We'll investigate the nature of grace and its relationship to resurrection, examining how sites of grace function as anchor points and resurrection hubs. We'll compare Tarnished resurrection with other supernatural states in the game, particularly those who live in death, to understand what makes the Tarnished's condition unique. We'll analyze the evidence from character interactions and dialogue, listening to what the inhabitants of the lands between reveal about the nature of resurrection, and we'll incorporate the revolutionary revelations from the shadow of the Erdtree expansion, which have fundamentally recontextualized our understanding of Marika's motivations and the cosmic order itself. By the end of this journey, we'll have examined the question from every possible angle, synthesizing evidence from item descriptions, environmental storytelling, character dialogue, game mechanics, and narrative structure. We'll explore not just whether the Tarnished are dead and being resurrected, but what it means to exist in a world where death itself has been fundamentally redefined, where cosmic authorities have abandoned their posts, and where love and loss drive decisions that reshape the nature of reality itself. So settle in, get comfortable, and prepare to explore one of Elden Ring's most fascinating mysteries. Whether you're listening to understand the lore more deeply, or simply letting the words wash over you as you drift off to sleep, this exploration of Tarnished resurrection will take you deep into the heart of what makes Elden Ring's world so rich, so complex, and so endlessly intriguing. The journey to understanding begins now, with our first question. What is death in the lands between, and how did it come to function so differently from death as we understand it? To understand whether the Tarnished are truly dead and being resurrected, we must first grasp how death itself functions in the lands between. This is not a world where death operates according to natural laws as we might understand them in our reality. Instead, death in Elden Ring's universe is governed by divine decree, cosmic intervention, and fundamental forces that have been deliberately manipulated to serve specific purposes. The most crucial element in understanding death in the lands between is the concept of destined death. This isn't simply death as we know it, the natural cessation of biological functions and the end of consciousness. Destined death represents the cosmic principle that allows for true, final, irrevocable ending. It is the force that ensures all things gods, demigods, and mortals alike can face genuine, permanent cessation of existence. Originally, Destined Death was contained within the Rune of Death, one of the fundamental components of the Elden Ring itself. This rune embodied the principle that all life must eventually end, that death was not merely a temporary state but a final destination under the natural order. When beings died under the regime of Destined Death, they would face true death. Their souls would depart to whatever lies beyond. Their stories would conclude definitively, and they would not return. The Rune of Death was more than just a philosophical concept or a theological principle. It was a tangible force woven into the fundamental structure of reality in the lands between. Its presence in the Elden Ring meant that death was an inescapable part of existence, a natural endpoint that no being, regardless of their power or status, could avoid indefinitely. However, Queen Marika the Eternal made a decision that would fundamentally alter the nature of existence in the lands between. She removed the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring, physically severing Destined Death from the cosmic order. This wasn't simply a theological change or a shift in religious doctrine. It was a literal rewriting of the basic laws of reality, a surgical modification to the code that governed existence itself. The implications of this action cannot be overstated. With Destined Death sealed away, true death became impossible for most beings in the lands between. The finality that had once been an inescapable part of existence was suddenly removed from the equation. Death didn't cease to exist entirely, but it transformed into something completely different from what it had been before. The Rune of Death, once removed from the Elden Ring, had to be kept somewhere safe. It was far too dangerous to simply destroy or discard. Marika entrusted this cosmic force to her shadow, Malekith the Black Blade. Malekith was chosen for this crucial role for several reasons. As a shadow-bound beast granted to Marika by the Two Fingers, he possessed the power necessary to guard such a potent force. His loyalty to Marika was absolute, ensured by the bond between an Empyrean and their shadow. Malekith didn't simply lock the Rune of Death away in a vault somewhere. He bound it to himself, incorporating it into his very being. The black flames that Malekith wields in battle are manifestations of Destined Death itself, capable of killing even gods and immortals. These flames represent the only readily accessible source of true death in the lands between, making Malekith one of the most dangerous beings in existence. The black blade that gives Malekith his epithet is infused with Destined Death. When this blade strikes, it doesn't just cause physical damage, it inflicts true mortality, reducing maximum health and preventing normal healing. In game mechanical terms, this is represented by the debuff that persists even after the immediate damage is dealt. In lore terms, it represents the blade touching its victim with the essence of true death, marking them for eventual cessation. With Destined Death removed from the natural order, the lands between entered what we might call the Age of the Erdtree. During this period, death took on an entirely different character from what it had been before. Instead of representing an ending, death became a transition, a recycling process overseen by the great golden tree that dominated the landscape. The Erdtree's role in this new system was fundamental. When beings died in the Age of the Erdtree, their souls didn't depart to some afterlife or simply cease to exist. Instead, they returned to the Erdtree, where they would be processed and eventually reborn. The tree functioned as a cosmic repository for souls, a divine recycling center that processed the essence of all beings in the lands between. This recycling system created what we observe throughout Elden Ring, a world where death is temporary for many beings. The various enemies we encounter respawn when we rest at sites of grace. This isn't just a gameplay convenience to repopulate the world. It reflects the cosmic recycling system at work. The Erdtree constantly draws souls back into itself, processes them, and releases them back into the world. The vast root system we see throughout the catacombs serves as a collection network for this process. These roots aren't just the tree's underground structure providing nutrients and stability. The contents and stability. They as curve and this. This is ingers that verbraken. These zingers, providing nutrients and stability, caddis. Pabankarolata. Agorolas. Decorares birth verwartus debades. They actively draw souls into the tree's embrace upon death. The catacombs themselves exist as processing centers where bodies are delivered to the tree's roots for soul extraction. The tree guardians we encounter in these locations aren't simply protecting graves in the traditional sense. They're maintaining the infrastructure of the death and rebirth system. They ensure that bodies are properly placed near the roots, that the soul collection process proceeds smoothly, and that nothing interferes with the Erdtree's fundamental function. However, this resurrection system was not universal or unconditional. The ability to return from death appeared to be tied to one's connection to the Golden Order, and, more specifically, to grace. Those blessed with grace could undergo this process of death and rebirth repeatedly. Those without grace, or those who lost their grace, would face a different fate when they died. This explains why we see various types of undead and undying beings throughout the lands between, each with their own relationship to death and resurrection. Not everyone who died would be smoothly recycled through the Erdtree system. Some would fall through the cracks, creating the various supernatural phenomena we encounter. Those who live in death represent a corruption of this system. These skeletal warriors and other undead creatures exist because they died but were touched by Deathroot, the spreading influence of Godwyn, the Golden's half-death. When Godwyn was killed in soul but not in body during the Night of Black Knives, his corpse began to corrupt, spreading a form of death that the Erdtree couldn't properly process. These creatures exist in a liminal state, neither truly alive nor properly dead, outside the tree's normal recycling process. They represent a fundamental breakdown in the system Marika created. The Erdtree doesn't know what to do with them, and they can't find peace through proper death, because Destined Death has been sealed away. The removal of Destined Death also explains why the demigods proved so difficult to kill permanently, even for each other during the Shattering. Without access to Destined Death, the conflicts between Marika's children became wars of attrition rather than decisive battles. Even when a demigod fell in combat, they wouldn't truly die. They would simply be reduced to a diminished state, eventually returning in some form. This created the stalemate we find when we arrive in the lands between. The demigods have been fighting for generations, killing each other repeatedly, but none can deliver the final blow that would permanently eliminate a rival. They're locked in an eternal conflict where victory is impossible because death has lost its finality. The concept of remembrances fits into this framework as well. When particularly powerful beings die, their essence is hunted into the tree, creating these crystallized memories that contain both their power and their story. Remembrances represent the tree's way of preserving the most significant souls, preventing them from being lost to the normal recycling process. Rather than being immediately reborn as lesser beings, the souls of demigods and other crucial figures are essentially archived, stored in crystallized form where they can be accessed, and their power claimed by others. This explains why we can consume remembrances for runes or trade them for unique items and abilities. We're literally absorbing or utilizing the crystallized essence of these powerful beings. The concept of grace becomes crucial in this context. Grace appears to be the mechanism by which the Erdtree identifies who should be included in its resurrection system. Those who possess grace are essentially marked as participants in the Golden Order, entitled to its benefits, including protection from true death. When grace was withdrawn from Godfrey and his warriors, transforming them into the first Tarnished, they lost this protection. They became vulnerable to permanent death, subject to mortality in the way that beings had been before Marika's intervention. This explains why the Tarnished had to die during their exile before they could be called back. However, the restoration of grace to the Tarnished after the Shattering would logically restore their access to the resurrection system. When grace returned to the dead Tarnished, it didn't just mark them as chosen. It reconnected them to the Erdtree's death-preventing infrastructure, granting them the ability to return from death just as other grace-blessed beings could. Yet there are complexities to this system that suggest it's not simply a matter of having grace or not having it. Some Tarnished, despite possessing grace, gradually lose their ability to resurrect. Sorcerer Rogier provides the clearest example of this phenomenon. He mentions having died before, indicating he's experienced resurrection firsthand, but he eventually faces permanent death as his grace fades, and his body succumbs to the Deathroot corruption spreading through him. This suggests that grace is not a static blessing, but a dynamic force that can strengthen or weaken based on various factors. The vigor of one's grace appears to determine not just their ability to resurrect, but how many times they can do so before the process begins to fail. Grace can be depleted through repeated use, or corrupted by exposure to forces that oppose the Golden Order. The shadow of the Erdtree expansion has revealed additional layers to this system, particularly regarding Marika's true motivations for removing Destined Death. The revelation that Marika was originally a shaman whose people were tortured and killed by the Hornsent suggests that her decision to seal away Destined Death may have been motivated by a deeply personal desire to prevent such final, irreversible loss. Having experienced the permanent death of her entire people, witnessing their torture, and the impossibility of bringing them back, Marika may have vowed that such ultimate loss would never be possible again. By removing Destined Death from the Elden Ring, she ensured that no one she cared about would ever be truly, irrevocably gone. Death would become a transition rather than an ending, a temporary setback rather than a final goodbye. This emotional context transforms our understanding of the death system in the lands between. What might seem like a cold, mechanical process of soul recycling takes on new meaning when we understand it as one woman's desperate attempt to prevent the kind of grief she experienced from ever happening to anyone else. Understanding this cosmic framework is essential for evaluating the nature of Tarnished resurrection. The Tarnished aren't operating outside the normal rules of death in the lands between. They're operating within a carefully modified system where death has been fundamentally redefined. The question isn't whether they're truly dead in our world's sense, but how they fit into a universe where death itself has been transformed from an ending into a transition. The infrastructure that enables this transformation, the Erdtree's roots, the sites of grace, the grace network itself represents a sophisticated supernatural technology designed to circumvent the natural order of mortality. The Tarnished are participants in this system, beneficiaries of Marika's cosmic intervention, protected by the same mechanisms that shield all grace-blessed beings from true death. The story of the Tarnished begins not with their resurrection after the shattering, but with their creation through exile many generations earlier. To understand what the Tarnished truly are, and why they possess their unique relationship with death, we must examine the historical events that brought them into existence. This tale begins in the early days of the Erdtree's dominance, when Queen Marika ruled alongside her first consort, Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. Godfrey was not always an Elden Lord, nor was he even originally named Godfrey. Before his elevation to godhood's consort, he was known as Hoarah, a chieftain of the Badlands, a warrior of tremendous skill and ferocity. His transformation from barbarian chieftain to refined lord represents one of the most significant character arcs in Elden Ring's background lore, and his eventual fate would create the entire category of beings we know as the Tarnished. The Badlands, Hoarah's homeland, were wild territories outside the influence of the Golden Order. The warriors who dwelt there were renowned for their martial prowess and their savage approach to combat. Hoarah stood out even among these fierce fighters, eventually rising to lead his people through sheer strength and force of will. When Marika ascended to godhood and established the Golden Order, she faced numerous challenges to her authority. The early age of the Erdtree was marked by warfare, as Marika sought to establish her dominion over the various peoples and powers of the lands between. She needed more than just divine authority to overcome these challenges. She needed a champion, a warrior capable of leading her armies against existential threats. Chief among these challenges were the fire giants, ancient beings who possessed the flame of ruin, a power capable of burning down the Erdtree itself. The fire giants represented a direct threat to Marika's entire cosmic order. Their flame could undo everything she had built, reducing the Golden Age to ashes. They had to be defeated decisively and permanently. In Hoarah, Marika found not just a powerful individual warrior, but a leader who commanded the loyalty of his own people. The marriage between Marika and Hoarah was both a political alliance and a genuine partnership. It combined divine authority with martial prowess, creating a power structure that could overcome any opposition. Upon their union, Hoarah was transformed into Godfrey, first Elden Lord. This transformation involved more than just a name change or a ceremonial title. It represented a fundamental change in his nature. The wild, barbaric aspects of his personality were suppressed, contained within the spectral lion Serosh that appeared upon his back. Serosh served as both a symbol of Godfrey's tamed nobility and a literal restraint upon his more savage impulses. The lion's claws dug into Godfrey's flesh, a constant reminder and physical limitation on his true nature. With Serosh's presence, Horalu became Godfrey, the refined lord suitable to stand beside a goddess. Together, Marika and Godfrey waged the wars that established the Golden Order's supremacy. Godfrey led the campaign against the fire giants, ultimately defeating their fell god and ensuring that the flame of ruin could no longer threaten the Erdtree. He fought against the Stormlord, claiming victory over the ancient ruler of Stormvale Castle. He waged war against countless other threats to Marika's reign. These victories were crucial not just for Marika's political power, but for the very survival of the Golden Order itself. Without Godfrey's military campaigns, the Erdtree might have been burned, the Elden Ring shattered before its time, the entire cosmic order overthrown by forces that rejected Marika's authority. During this period, Godfrey and Marika had children who would become some of the most significant figures in the game's lore. Godwyn the Golden, beloved prince and eventual victim of the Knight of Black Knives, embodied the best qualities of both his parents. He was noble, powerful, beloved by all who knew him, and stood as the golden ideal of what a demigod should be. Morgott and Mohg, the twin omens, represented a different aspect of Godfrey's legacy, cursed with horns and a connection to forces that the Golden Order considered abhorrent. These two were hidden away in shame. Despite their curse, both would prove to be formidable warriors and, in Morgott's case, a devoted defender of the Erdtree, even while being rejected by the order he served. The family of Godfrey and Marika represented the pinnacle of the Golden Order's nobility, combining divine heritage with martial excellence. They seemed destined to rule the lands between forever, an unshakable foundation for Marika's cosmic order. However, something changed after Godfrey's final victory. Item descriptions tell us that when his last worthy enemy fell, the hue of his eyes faded. This cryptic phrase has been interpreted in various ways, but it clearly suggests that Godfrey lost something essential when he had no more battles to fight, no more challenges to overcome. Some believe this phrase indicates that Godfrey lost his grace at this moment, that the golden light left his eyes when his purpose was fulfilled. Others interpret it more metaphorically, suggesting that Godfrey lost his warrior spirit, his drive, his essential nature when he had nothing left to conquer. Regardless of the specific mechanism, it's clear that Godfrey's usefulness to Marika's grand design had reached its end. What happened next would create the Tarnished and set in motion events that would culminate thousands of years later in our arrival in the lands between. Marika made the momentous decision to banish Godfrey and his warriors from the lands between. This wasn't a punishment for failure or betrayal. It was a strategic move, part of a plan that Marika had been developing for reasons we're only now beginning to understand. Marika's words at the Church of Pilgrimage, preserved through Melina's recollections, provide crucial insight into this moment. My lord and thy warriors, I divest each of thee of thy grace. With thine eyes dimmed, ye will be driven from the lands between. Ye will wage war in a land afar, where ye will live and die. These weren't words spoken in anger or disappointment. They were a carefully planned pronouncement, part of a strategy that Marika had been formulating perhaps since she first claimed the Elden Ring. The banishment was deliberate, purposeful, and most importantly, temporary. Crucially, Marika's declaration included a promise that reveals the true nature of the banishment. Then, after thy death, I will give back what I once claimed, return to the lands between, wage war, and brandish the Elden Ring, grow strong in the face of death. Alledens, thou few, wadage di war, grow strong in the face of death. This promise reveals that the banishment was never intended to be permanent. It was part of a long-term plan that required the Tarnished to spend time in exile, growing strong through hardship and warfare in distant lands. Marika was explicitly planning for their return, for a time when she would restore their grace and call them back to the lands between. The immediate result of this banishment was the Long March, a mass exodus of Godfrey and his followers from the lands between. This wasn't a chaotic flight of refugees. It was an organized military campaign, a structured withdrawal. The Tarnished didn't simply scatter in panic. They marched out as an army, maintaining their discipline and purpose, even as they lost the divine blessing that had sustained them. Evidence for the Long March can be found throughout the Weeping Peninsula, which appears to have been the route taken by the departing Tarnished. The area's name itself suggests the sorrow of this departure, the tears shed by those leaving their homeland forever, or so they thought. The atmosphere of loss and melancholy that permeates the region may reflect the emotional weight of this historical event. Castle Morn's storyline, with its themes of loyalty, duty, and ultimate futility, might echo the mood of the Long March. The castle stands as a monument to service and sacrifice, qualities that would have been tested to their limits during the Tarnished's departure from grace. The Tower of Return, with its teleportation trap that sends players directly to Lendel, might originally have been built as a beacon or waypoint for the eventual return of the Tarnished. Its name is certainly suggestive, and its function bringing those who activate it to the capital seems almost prophetic, given what we know about the Tarnished's destined return. The Long March eventually brought Godfrey and his warriors to the Badlands, the regions outside the lands between where they would continue their existence as exiles. In these foreign lands, they would wage wars, face death, and gradually grow strong in ways that would have been impossible had they remained within the comfortable confines of Marika's realm. But the Long March didn't end with all the Tarnished following Godfrey to the same destination. Evidence suggests that the Tarnished diaspora spread across multiple lands and regions. The character backgrounds available to players at character creation suggest origins from various cultures and locations. The Land of Reeds, suggesting an Asian-inspired culture. Northern lands with their own traditions. Nomadic peoples who wandered rather than settling. This dispersal suggests that the original army of exiles eventually fragmented, with different groups settling in different regions. Whether this was part of Marika's plan or an unintended consequence of the exile is unclear, but it resulted in Tarnished spreading across the entire world beyond the lands between. During their time in exile, the Tarnished lived full lives. They didn't exist in some state of suspended animation, waiting for Marika's call. They formed new communities, established bloodlines, integrated with local populations. They married, had children, grew old, and eventually died. The exile lasted for generations, long enough that the original Tarnished who marched out with Godfrey all passed away through natural death or death in battle. This is evidenced by characters like Fire and Rogier, who come from royal lineages in distant lands but are still considered Tarnished. Being Tarnished became a hereditary condition, passed down through bloodlines from the original exiles to their descendants. A Tarnished's child would be Tarnished, and their children's children, on through the generations. The Tarnished in exile also maintained their warrior culture despite being separated from the lands between for centuries. Items like the Highland Axe suggest that even generations after the Long March, descendants of Godfrey's warriors preserved the fighting traditions of their ancestors. The ceremonial aspects of combat, the battle cries, the formal introductions before duels, all of these persisted across the generations. During this entire period of exile, the Tarnished faced genuine, permanent death. Unlike their later resurrection-enabled existence after being called back, during the Long March and the subsequent centuries of exile, death was final for the Tarnished. They had been severed from grace and from the protective mechanisms of the Golden Order. When they died in foreign wars or from natural causes, they remained dead. They were buried, mourned, and lost to the world just as any mortal would be. This understanding is crucial for interpreting Marika's promise. When she spoke of giving back grace after thy death, she was referring to literal death, the permanent end that would come to all Tarnished during their exile. The restoration of grace wasn't simply about returning a blessing to living beings. It was about calling back the dead themselves, resurrecting those who had passed away decades or even centuries earlier. The mechanism by which this mass resurrection occurred remains one of the deeper mysteries of Elden Ring's lore. It suggests that Marika retained some connection to the exiled Tarnished even after severing their grace, and that she possessed the power to restore not just their divine blessing but their very lives. This implies a level of divine authority that extends beyond the normal bounds of the Golden Order, reaching into death itself to reclaim those who had passed beyond. The timing of this mass resurrection is significant and revealing. Grace was restored to the Tarnished after the Shattering, when Marika's demigod children proved incapable of claiming the throne and restoring the Elden Ring. The demigods' war had reached a stalemate. None could permanently defeat the others. None could claim enough great runes to become Elden Lord, and the lands between had descended into chaos, with no end in sight. This suggests that the Tarnished were always intended as a contingency plan, a force that could be called upon if Marika's primary dynasty failed. She had spent centuries, perhaps millennia, preparing this backup option, allowing the Tarnished to live, die, and grow strong in exile specifically, so they would be ready when needed. Some of the most compelling evidence for this interpretation comes from Marika's relationship with Hugh, the misbegotten blacksmith of Round Table Hold. Hugh speaks of a promise he made to Marika to forge a weapon capable of killing a god. The timing and nature of this promise suggest it was made in anticipation of the Tarnished's return, preparing them for battles against powers that had once seemed unassailable. The revelation in Shadow of the Erdtree about Marika's origins as a shaman adds another layer to this historical context. The discovery that Marika's people were tortured and killed by the Hornsent provides a potential motivation for her creation of the Tarnished that we hadn't previously considered. Having experienced the permanent loss of her people, having witnessed their torture and been unable to bring them back, Marika may have designed the Tarnished as a force that could overcome any opposition, including death itself. If her people could have returned from death as the Tarnished can, the genocide at the Shaman village would never have succeeded. The Shamans would have risen again and again until they prevailed. This emotional context transforms the Tarnished from simple pawns in a cosmic game to something more profound. They are Marika's answer to the ultimate tragedy she experienced. They represent her determination that such permanent, irrevocable loss should never be possible again. The Tarnished's ability to return from death repeatedly is the ultimate expression of Marika's refusal to accept final endings. This historical framework establishes that the Tarnished's relationship with death is not a natural condition but an artificial one created through divine intervention. They are not inherently undead or immortal beings. They are mortals who died during their exile and were then resurrected by Marika's power, granted access to a supernatural system that allows them to continue returning from death as long as they maintain their grace. Understanding this distinction is crucial for answering the central question of their nature. The Tarnished were dead, truly and permanently dead during their exile. They were then resurrected through Marika's intervention and connected to a system that prevents them from dying permanently again. They are not simply undead creatures shambling through existence. They are living beings who have been given a second chance at life and equipped with the supernatural ability to keep getting more chances no matter how many times they fall. The concept of grace lies at the very heart of understanding what the Tarnished are and how their resurrection functions. Grace is not simply a blessing or a form of divine favor in the conventional sense. It is the fundamental mechanism that connects beings to the cosmic order of the lands between, and more importantly for our purposes, it is the force that enables resurrection from death. Grace manifests visually as a golden light that dwells within the eyes of those blessed by it. This isn't merely symbolic imagery. Characters throughout the game comment on the presence or absence of this golden gleam as a reliable indicator of whether someone possesses grace. When we encounter other Tarnished who have lost their grace, one of the most common observations is that their eyes have grown dim, losing that characteristic golden luminosity that marks the grace blessed. The relationship between grace and the Erdtree appears to be fundamental and inseparable. Grace is described as emanating from the Erdtree and the Elden Ring, representing their presence and influence in the world. Those who possess grace are essentially marked as participants in the Golden Order, entitled to its protections and bound by its laws. When grace is withdrawn, the connection to this divine system is severed, leaving the individual vulnerable to permanent death. But grace is not a simple on-off switch, a binary state of having it or not having it. The evidence throughout Elden Ring suggests that grace exists in varying degrees of intensity and stability. Some Tarnished, like our protagonist, seem to possess a particularly robust connection to grace that allows for seemingly unlimited resurrection. Others, like Sorcerer Rogier, begin with grace but gradually lose it over time, eventually facing permanent death when their connection fails completely. Rogier's case is particularly instructive for understanding how grace operates. He specifically mentions having died before, indicating that he has experienced resurrection firsthand. This confirms that resurrection through grace is not unique to the player character but is shared by multiple Tarnished. However, over the course of his questline, we witness his gradual decline. Rogier speaks of growing weary, of feeling his strength ebb away, of sensing that his time is running out. This isn't the typical fatigue of physical exertion, or even the exhaustion from repeated battles. It's something deeper, a spiritual exhaustion that suggests his grace is being depleted with each resurrection. His eventual permanent death confirms that the resurrection system has limits and can fail when pushed too far or corrupted by opposing forces. The circumstances that can weaken grace appear to be related to exposure to forces that oppose the Golden Order. Rogier's decline is explicitly linked to his investigation of those who live in death and his contact with Deathroot. The corruption that spreads through his body, visible in the black marks that gradually consume him, seems to interfere with his connection to grace, gradually severing the divine link that enables his resurrection. This understanding helps explain why different Tarnished have different relationships with death and resurrection. It's not simply a matter of being tarnished or not being tarnished. It's about the strength and stability of one's grace, about how much divine energy one has access to, and how efficiently that energy is used. The player character appears to possess an exceptionally strong connection to grace, one that can withstand repeated deaths and resurrections without weakening. The guidance aspect of grace is equally important for understanding the Tarnished's nature and purpose. Grace doesn't simply enable resurrection. It actively guides the Tarnished towards specific goals and locations. The golden threads of guidance that point towards sites of grace and important objectives aren't arbitrary or random. They represent grace actively directing the Tarnished toward fulfilling their purpose. This guidance suggests that grace is not a passive blessing, but an active force with its own agenda. The Tarnished aren't simply wandering the lands between with the incidental ability to resurrect. They're being deliberately guided towards specific goals by the force that grants them this power. The golden rays point the way, suggesting which direction to travel, which objectives to pursue, which sites of grace to seek out. This raises important questions about agency and free will in the Tarnished's journey. Are they truly making their own choices, or are they being manipulated by the guidance of grace? The game's multiple endings suggest that the Tarnished do possess genuine agency. They can choose to follow grace's guidance or reject it, can pursue the goals it suggests or chart their own course. But the constant presence of that golden guidance, always there in their vision, always suggesting the next step, certainly influences their decisions. The sites of grace themselves provide crucial insight into how the resurrection system operates, and we'll explore them in detail in the next section. But for now, it's important to understand that these locations are more than just checkpoints or resting places. They are specific locations where grace concentrates and manifests, where the divine energy that enables resurrection is most accessible. The fact that the Tarnished resurrect specifically at sites of grace, rather than at the location of their death, indicates that the resurrection process is tied to these grace-concentrated areas. Death essentially triggers a recall function that draws the Tarnished's essence back to the safety of grace, where their body can be restored and their consciousness reunited with physical form. The restoration of grace to the Tarnished after the shattering represents one of the most significant events in the game's timeline. This wasn't simply Marika deciding to lift a punishment or reverse a decision made centuries earlier. It was the activation of a contingency plan that had been prepared long ago, waiting for the specific circumstances that would make it necessary. The calling back of the Tarnished involved not just the restoration of grace but actual resurrection from death. The opening narration refers to the Tarnished as ye dead who yet live, and various sources confirm that the Tarnished had actually died during their exile before being called back. This mass resurrection represents one of the most dramatic demonstrations of divine power in the game's lore. The specificity of who received grace also provides important clues about the selection criteria. Not every descendant of the original exiled Tarnished was called back. Only specific individuals who met certain criteria received the restoration of grace and the call to return to the lands between. The opening cinematic shows us several of these chosen Tarnished. Fia the deathbed companion, Gideon Ovnir the all-knowing, dung-eater, gold mask, and of course our protagonist. Each of these chosen Tarnished represents a different approach to the challenge facing the lands between. Fia seeks to establish a new order based on acceptance of death and those who live in death. Goldmask pursues the perfection of the existing golden order through philosophical and theological inquiry. Dung-eater aims to curse all existence with the Omen Curse. Our protagonist's approach is left undefined, allowing for player choice in how to address the crisis. This diversity suggests that grace was restored not randomly, but with the intention of providing multiple potential solutions to the crisis. The entities controlling the bestowal of grace, whether Marika herself, the Two Fingers, or some other authority, apparently decided that multiple different approaches should be attempted. This might indicate wisdom and flexibility, or it might suggest desperation and uncertainty about which approach would actually succeed. The fact that these diverse Tarnished were all granted the same fundamental power resurrection through grace suggests that this ability is seen as necessary equipment for the task ahead. The challenges facing anyone attempting to claim the Elden Ring are so severe that the ability to return from death repeatedly is considered essential rather than optional. Without resurrection, the task would be functionally impossible. However, the restoration of grace to the Tarnished also came with limitations and conditions. Not all Tarnished who returned proved capable of maintaining their grace indefinitely. Some, like various non-player characters we encounter, speak of losing their grace and facing the prospect of permanent death. This suggests that the initial calling back was just the beginning. Maintaining grace requires ongoing fulfillment of certain conditions or conservation of divine energy. The Shadow of the Erdtree expansion has provided additional context for understanding grace through revelations about Marika's origins and the nature of the Two Fingers. The discovery that the Two Fingers may not have been in communication with the greater will for millennia raises questions about the ultimate source of grace and whether it represents divine will or something else entirely. The revelation about Metyr, Mother of Fingers, suggests that the entire system of grace and divine guidance may have been operating without direct oversight from the greater will for far longer than anyone realized. If grace is not directly controlled by the greater will, but rather represents the actions of abandoned intermediaries like Metyr and the Two Fingers, then the resurrection of the Tarnished might represent not divine intervention, but the desperate actions of cosmic entities trying to fulfill ancient directives without clear guidance from their supposed master. This interpretation would cast the Tarnished's resurrection in a different light. Rather than being chosen by an all-knowing deity with a perfect plan, they might be the product of cosmic entities attempting to resolve a crisis using outdated instructions and incomplete information. The fact that multiple Tarnished with contradictory goals were all granted grace might reflect this confusion rather than deliberate planning. If Metyr and the Two Fingers have been operating autonomously for ages, trying to interpret what the greater will would want without being able to actually ask, then their decision to resurrect the Tarnished and grant them seemingly unlimited resurrection abilities might represent improvisation rather than execution of a divine master plan. They might be throwing everything they have at the problem, hoping something works. Regardless of its ultimate source, grace remains the practical mechanism that enables Tarnished resurrection. It connects them to sites of grace, guides their actions, and provides the divine energy necessary for returning from death. Understanding grace is therefore crucial for understanding what the Tarnished are. Beings who have been granted an artificial connection to cosmic forces that override the normal rules of mortality. The Tarnished are not naturally immortal or undead. They are mortals who have been equipped with a divine override system that allows them to bypass death through the power of grace. This distinction is important because it suggests that their resurrection is not inherent to their nature, but dependent on maintaining their connection to this external force. If grace is withdrawn or depleted, they become vulnerable to permanent death, returning to the mortality that all beings naturally possess. The sites of grace scattered throughout the lands between are far more than mere checkpoints or resting places for weary travelers. These luminous golden markers represent a sophisticated divine infrastructure that serves multiple crucial functions in the cosmic order of Elden Ring's universe. To understand how Tarnished Resurrection truly works, we must examine these sites not just as gameplay conveniences, but as integral components of a vast metaphysical system. Each site of grace consists of what appears to be a small collection of golden, root-like structures emanating light and particles that drift upward like ethereal embers. These are described in-game as luminous remnants of grace, suggesting they are not simply decorative elements but actual concentrations of the divine force that enables Tarnished Resurrection. The fact that these sites can be seen glowing from significant distances indicates they possess considerable supernatural energy. The distribution of sites of grace throughout the lands between follows patterns that suggest deliberate placement rather than random occurrence. They appear at crucial junctions, near important landmarks, before challenging encounters, and in locations that would be strategically valuable for travelers. This distribution implies that the sites were established as part of a comprehensive network designed to support specific activities, namely, the quest of the Tarnished to claim the Elden Ring. When we examine the functionality of sites of grace, their true sophistication becomes apparent. Resting at these sites doesn't simply restore the Tarnished's health and magical energy. It performs a complete reset of their physical and spiritual condition. Injuries are healed perfectly, exhaustion is eliminated completely, and magical reserves are fully replenished. This level of restoration goes far beyond natural rest and clearly involves supernatural intervention. More significantly, sites of grace serve as anchor points for resurrection. When a Tarnished dies anywhere in the world, their consciousness and soul return to the most recently activated site of grace, where they are reunited with a fully restored body. This process is instantaneous and appears to involve the complete reconstruction of the Tarnished's physical form rather than simply healing their corpse. The mechanics of this resurrection process reveal important details about the nature of Tarnished existence. The fact that the Tarnished resurrect at sites of grace, rather than where they died, suggests that their consciousness or soul is fundamentally linked to these locations. Death essentially triggers a recall function that draws the Tarnished's essence back to the safety of grace, where a new body awaits or is created for them. This process bears some similarities to the Erdtree's normal death and rebirth cycle that we discussed earlier, but with important differences. Unlike normal resurrection through the Erdtree, which appears to involve complete recycling of the soul and potential loss of identity, Tarnished Resurrection preserves perfect continuity of memory and identity. The Tarnished who returns at the site of grace is the same person who died, with all their memories, skills, and personality intact. The relationship between sites of grace and the broader Erdtree root network provides crucial context for understanding this system. Throughout the lands between, we can observe that the underground is permeated with massive tree roots belonging to the Erdtree. These roots connect distant locations and appear to form a vast communication and transport network beneath the surface. Sites of grace may represent surface manifestations or access points to this underground network. The golden, root-like appearance of the sites certainly suggests a connection to the Erdtree's root system. This connection would help explain how sites of grace can instantly resurrect Tarnished from anywhere in the world. The Erdtree's roots essentially serve as a supernatural infrastructure, allowing for the rapid transmission of souls and information across vast distances. When a Tarnished dies, their soul might travel through this root network to the nearest active site of grace, where it can be reunited with a restored body. This would make the resurrection process not magical in the mystical sense, but technological in a supernatural sense, utilizing existing infrastructure to achieve effects that seem miraculous, but actually follow consistent rules and mechanisms. The process of discovering sites of grace also reveals important aspects of their nature. Sites of grace aren't simply found lying around the landscape waiting to be used by anyone. Instead, they must be touched and acknowledged by a grace-blessed individual before they become functional for that person. This suggests that sites of grace exist in a dormant state until activated by someone with the proper spiritual qualifications. The fact that only grace-blessed individuals can activate sites of grace indicates that these locations are secured against unauthorized use. This security measure makes sense given their function. Sites of grace essentially provide godlike powers of resurrection and restoration. Such capabilities would be incredibly dangerous if available to hostile forces or those who oppose the Golden Order. The guidance function of sites of grace provides another layer of insight into their purpose. Active sites of grace emit golden threads that point toward objectives, other grace sites, or important locations. This guidance system suggests that sites of grace are not just passive anchor points, but active participants in directing the Tarnished's journey. They don't simply provide resurrection, they actively guide the resurrected Tarnished toward fulfilling their mission. This guidance capability implies that sites of grace possess some form of intelligence or connection to a guiding consciousness. They somehow know where the Tarnished should go next and can provide navigation assistance accordingly. This level of sophisticated functionality suggests that sites of grace are components of a larger system with awareness and intentionality rather than simply magical waypoints. The introduction of stakes of Marika in certain areas provides an interesting counterpoint to sites of grace and illuminates their nature through comparison. Stakes of Marika are tall, slender markers that appear near boss arenas and challenging encounters. They allow Tarnished to choose their resurrection point when they die nearby, essentially providing a quick respawn option that saves the time of running back from a distant site of grace. However, stakes of Marika don't provide the full restoration and guidance functions of sites of grace. You can resurrect at a stake of Marika, but you can't rest there to restore health and flasks, change your equipment loadout, level up, or access the guidance features. They're resurrection points and nothing more. The existence of stakes of Marika suggests that the resurrection technology underlying sites of grace can be implemented in different forms with varying capabilities. This modularity implies that the entire system was deliberately designed and engineered rather than arising through natural processes. Someone, presumably Marika herself, created this resurrection network with specific purposes in mind, and sites of grace represent the full-featured implementation, while stakes of Marika are simplified versions for specific tactical purposes. The temporal aspects of sites of grace also deserve attention and raise intriguing questions. These locations allow Tarnished to manipulate the passage of time, advancing from day to night or vice versa at will. This temporal control suggests that sites of grace exist partially outside normal time or have the ability to manipulate local temporal conditions. Such capabilities far exceed simple healing or resurrection and indicate connection to fundamental cosmic forces. The ability to manipulate time, even in this limited way, suggests that sites of grace are interfaces to powers that transcend normal physical laws. This reinforces the interpretation that they are components of divine infrastructure rather than simply magical locations. The ability to level up at sites of grace reveals another crucial function that illuminates the Tarnished's nature. They serve as interfaces for soul processing and power enhancement. When Tarnished spend runes to increase their attributes, they're essentially using sites of grace as terminals for upgrading their spiritual and physical capabilities. This process involves the conversion of accumulated life energy runes into permanent improvements to the Tarnished's fundamental nature. The fact that this upgrading process can only be performed at sites of grace suggests that these locations possess the necessary infrastructure for safely modifying souls. Such modifications would be incredibly dangerous if performed incorrectly, potentially resulting in spiritual damage or dissolution of identity. Sites of grace apparently provide the controlled environment necessary for such delicate operations. The connection between sites of grace and finger maidens provides additional context for their function. Finger maidens are described as beings who can convert runes into strength for their assigned Tarnished. The fact that this process occurs at sites of grace suggests that these locations serve as workshops where Finger Maidens can safely perform soul modification procedures. Melina's role as the player character's Finger Maiden or Finger Maiden substitute involves facilitating this process. She appears at sites of grace, enables the leveling system, and serves as an interface between the Tarnished and the Grace network. Her presence suggests that sites of grace require some form of spiritual intermediary to unlock their full functionality, or at least that such intermediaries make the process more efficient and safe. The shadow of the Erdtree expansion has revealed additional details about the infrastructure underlying sites of grace through its exploration of the relationship between the lands between and the realm of shadow. The discovery that these realms exist as overlaid versions of the same geographic space, separated by Marika's veil, suggests that sites of grace might be accessing a network that spans multiple dimensional layers. In the realm of shadow, we encounter Erdtree fragments that serve a similar function to sites of grace in the base game, providing power enhancement and serving as rally points. The parallel between these systems suggests that the Grace network might be one implementation of more fundamental technology for supporting artificial resurrection and power enhancement. The Erdtree system operates independently from the Erdtree system, yet serves similar purposes. This suggests that the underlying principles of resurrection infrastructure are not unique to the Golden Order, but represent applications of more fundamental cosmic forces. Marika may have adapted or copied existing systems when she created the Grace network, or the two systems might share common origins. The revelation about Marika's origins and her connection to shamanic traditions also provides new context for sites of grace. The shamanic ability to meld harmoniously with others, to blend souls and essences, might be related to the technology underlying grace sites. These locations might represent applications of shamanic soul-working techniques scaled up to divine proportions. If Marika learned soul manipulation techniques from her shamanic heritage, she might have used these skills to create the Grace network. Loz is in well, an all loz to Heshibrews. My lemon mine on Lovi. She might have used these skills to create the Grace network. Sites of grace would then be anchors where she wove together divine power, Erdtree infrastructure, and shamanic soul working to create locations capable of preserving consciousness and reconstructing bodies. Understanding sites of grace as sophisticated components of divine infrastructure, rather than simple checkpoints, fundamentally changes our perspective on what the Tarnished represent. They are not simply undead beings who happen to resurrect when killed. They are participants in an elaborate support system designed to enable their success against overwhelming odds. Their resurrection is not an inherent supernatural ability possessed by their bodies or souls. It's access to a carefully engineered network of divine technology that enables their consciousness to survive physical death and be reunited with restored bodies. This makes their condition more artificial than natural, more technological than mystical, more dependent on external systems than on any inherent quality they possess. The dependence on sites of grace also explains why Tarnished, who lose their grace, eventually face permanent death. Without access to the Grace network, they lose the ability to utilize sites of grace for resurrection. Their connection to the system is severed, making them vulnerable to true death, despite their previous apparent immortality. They become like computers disconnected from a network, unable to access the cloud storage that preserves their data. This technological interpretation suggests that Tarnished resurrection is both more impressive and more limited than true resurrection. It's more impressive because it involves sophisticated supernatural engineering that goes far beyond simply returning from death. It requires a vast network of infrastructure, careful maintenance of divine energy, and complex soul manipulation. It's more limited because it's not a fundamental override of mortality, but rather access to an artificial system that simulates the effects of immortality within specific parameters. To truly understand whether the Tarnished are dead and being resurrected or something else entirely, we must examine the precise mechanics of what happens when a Tarnished dies and subsequently returns. This process is far more complex and nuanced than a simple death and resurrection cycle, involving intricate supernatural mechanisms that blur the line between life, death, and something altogether different. When a Tarnished receives what would normally be fatal damage, whether from a weapon strike, magical attack, environmental hazard, or fall from a great height. Several things occur almost simultaneously that distinguish their experience from normal death. First, there's the physical trauma that would kill an ordinary being. The body is damaged beyond its ability to sustain life. Vital organs are destroyed, massive blood loss occurs, or the spine is severed. By any normal standard, death should be the result. However, the Tarnished doesn't simply die in the conventional sense. Instead, something intervenes at the moment of what should be death. Based on the seamless nature of the transition we experience as players, this intervention appears to occur instantly, at the precise moment when life would normally cease. There's no period of being dead, no gap in consciousness, no void between dying and returning. This immediate intervention suggests that Grace is constantly monitoring the Tarnished's condition, ready to activate the resurrection protocol the instant death becomes inevitable. Like a safety net that catches someone the moment they fall, Grace appears to intercept the Tarnished's consciousness at the moment of death, preventing them from experiencing true cessation of existence. The continuity of the resurrection experience provides important clues about its nature. When a Tarnished dies, there's no apparent gap in consciousness or period of void. One moment they're experiencing fatal damage, perhaps seeing the "you died" message appear on their screen, and the next moment they're awakening at a site of grace, with full awareness of what happened. This continuity suggests that consciousness is preserved throughout the process, rather than being extinguished and then recreated. This preservation of consciousness is crucial for distinguishing Tarnished resurrection from traditional resurrection narratives. In most stories of resurrection, there's a period where the deceased is truly dead, their consciousness extinguished, their soul departed. When they return to life, they often describe experiencing nothing during the time they were dead, or they report visions of an afterlife before being called back. The Tarnished experience neither of these. There's no report of an afterlife, no void of non-existence, no gap in awareness. The experience is more akin to teleportation or respawning than to death and resurrection. The Tarnished's consciousness never stops. It simply relocates from the dying body to a new body at a site of grace. The speed of the resurrection process supports this interpretation. Traditional resurrection narratives typically involve some period where the deceased remains dead before being returned to life, whether minutes, hours, or days. The resurrection might require ritual, prayer, divine intervention, or magical ceremony. Tarnished resurrection, by contrast, appears instantaneous. The moment death should occur, the Tarnished is already elsewhere, already restored, already ready to try again. This instantaneous nature could suggest that death never actually occurs in the conventional sense. Rather than dying and then being resurrected, the Tarnished might be having their death prevented or bypassed through grace intervention. At the moment when death should happen, grace might be extracting their consciousness and relocating it before death can actually claim them. The state of the Tarnished's body upon return provides additional evidence for this interpretation. When a Tarnished resurrects at a site of grace, their body appears completely restored, not just healed from whatever injuries killed them, but returned to perfect condition. Every wound is closed, every broken bone is mended, all exhaustion is eliminated, all resources are replenished. This level of restoration goes far beyond conventional healing. This perfect reconstruction suggests that the resurrection process might involve creating an entirely new physical form rather than repairing the damaged original body. The body that was destroyed in combat is essentially discarded, left where it fell, while the consciousness is provided with a completely fresh vessel at the site of grace. This would make Tarnished resurrection fundamentally different from traditional resurrection, which typically involves returning life to the original body. The loss of runes upon death provides another piece of this puzzle. When a Tarnished dies, they lose all accumulated runes, which remain at the location of their death and can be recovered by returning to that spot. This mechanic suggests that runes are tied to the physical form rather than the consciousness or soul. When the original body is destroyed, the runes it carried remain with those remains rather than transferring to the new body created at the site of grace. However, certain elements do transfer from the old body to the new one, and these transfers are revealing. Equipment, weapons, armor, consumables in the inventory, all of these carry over to the resurrected form. More importantly, memories and experiences transfer completely. The Tarnished remembers everything that happened up to the moment of death, retains all skills and knowledge, maintains their complete identity and personality. This selective transfer suggests a sophisticated process that distinguishes between different types of information and resources. Physical items that were equipped or stored in inventory transfer to the new body. Accumulated spiritual energy, runes, that was loosely held remains with the old body. But core identity, memory, skills, and knowledge transfer completely and perfectly. This pattern implies that the resurrection system categorizes what makes a Tarnished, who they are, memories, personality, skills, and prioritizes, preserving these essential elements while treating other aspects like runes as expendable. The system appears designed to maintain perfect continuity of identity while resetting certain variables like accumulated power. The experience of Tarnished who gradually lose their grace, like sorcerer Rogier, provides insight into how this system can fail and what that failure looks like. Rogier's progressive decline suggests that repeated deaths constrain the grace connection, making each subsequent resurrection more difficult and less reliable. Eventually, the system fails entirely, resulting in true permanent death, when the grace network can no longer support the consciousness transfer process. Rogier's dialogue about feeling weary and sensing his grace fading suggests that he's aware of this degradation occurring. He can feel the connection weakening, can sense that he's running out of resurrections. This awareness implies that grace has a tangible presence that can be felt and monitored, that Tarnished can sense when their connection is strong or weak. This degradation pattern implies that grace functions like a limited resource or battery that can be depleted through overuse or corrupted by opposing forces. Each resurrection draws on this spiritual energy, and some Tarnished possess larger reserves or more efficient grace usage than others. The player character appears to have an exceptionally robust grace connection that can support unlimited resurrections under normal circumstances, but even this mighty connection might have limits that simply aren't reached during normal gameplay. The behavior of enemies in relation to Tarnished death also provides clues about the nature of this process. When a Tarnished dies, enemies typically cease their aggressive behavior and return to their original positions, as if the threat has been eliminated. From their perspective, they have successfully killed an intruder. The fact that they don't anticipate resurrection or take measures to prevent it implies that the ability is not common knowledge or universal expectation. This suggests that even in a world where the Erdtree recycles souls and various forms of resurrection exist, the specific resurrection enjoyed by the Tarnished is unusual enough that most beings don't expect or prepare for it. The Tarnished's ability to return from death is special even in a world where death has lost much of its finality. The respawning of enemies when Tarnished rest at sites of grace reveals another aspect of how the resurrection system interacts with the broader world. Most enemies return to life when the Tarnished uses a site of grace, suggesting that these locations trigger a wider reset effect that affects multiple beings simultaneously. This mass resurrection capability indicates that sites of grace are connected to the Erdtree's fundamental life-cycling systems. However, this reset is selective. Certain enemies don't respawn even when other creatures do. Bosses, unique characters, and certain special enemies remain dead permanently after being defeated. This selective resurrection suggests that the Grace Network distinguishes between different types of beings, providing different levels of resurrection support based on various criteria. The fact that defeated bosses don't respawn even though regular enemies do implies that boss-level beings are processed differently by the Erdtree system. Rather than being recycled back into the world immediately, defeated bosses appear to be hunted into the Erdtree and converted into remembrances, crystallized essences that preserve their power and story. This process appears to prevent their normal resurrection, suggesting that the Erdtree can selectively disable resurrection for specific beings based on their significance. The mechanism by which some Tarnished can permanently die despite possessing grace reveals important limitations of the system. Characters like D, Hunter of the Dead, can be killed permanently by other Tarnished through specific circumstances. This indicates that Tarnished resurrection, while powerful, is not absolute. This multi-dimensional functionality adds another layer of sophistication to the resurrection system. It's not simply monitoring and preserving consciousness within a single world, but tracking Tarnished across multiple parallel instances of reality and ensuring they can return to their home dimension when needed. The infrastructure required for such capability would be staggeringly complex, reinforcing the interpretation that sites of grace are components of truly divine technology. The shadow of the Erdtree expansion has provided additional insight into resurrection mechanics through its introduction of the Erdtree fragment system. These fragments function similarly to sites of grace in the main game but operate independently, suggesting that resurrection technology can be implemented through different supernatural frameworks. The parallel systems imply that resurrection capabilities are not unique to grace, but represent applications of more fundamental cosmic principles. The fact that the Erdtree system can provide similar functionality to the grace system without being directly connected to it suggests that the underlying principles are universal rather than specific to Marika's Golden Order. Multiple cosmic entities or forces might be capable of creating resurrection infrastructure using similar techniques applied through different divine authorities. When we examine all these mechanics together, a picture emerges of Tarnished resurrection that is neither simple death and return nor conventional immortality. Instead, it appears to be a sophisticated supernatural process that prevents true death by intercepting consciousness at the moment of physical destruction and providing it with a new vessel at a prepared location. The Tarnished don't repeatedly die and come back to life in the traditional sense. They repeatedly have their consciousness rescued from death at the last possible moment and relocated to safety. The body that was destroyed is abandoned, left where it fell, its accumulated runes still with it. But the consciousness, the core of who the Tarnished is extracted before true death can occur and installed in a fresh body at the nearest site of grace. This interpretation suggests that the question, are the Tarnished dead and being resurrected, may be based on a false premise. The Tarnished aren't dying in the true sense because their consciousness is preserved throughout the process. They're experiencing destruction of their physical form, followed by consciousness transfer to a new body. But consciousness itself never ceases, never experiences the void of non-existence. This is neither traditional life nor traditional death, but something altogether different, a kind of supernatural existence that transcends normal mortality through technological rather than inherent means. The Tarnished are not immortal in the sense of being unable to die. They can die, and their bodies are destroyed regularly, but they possess access to a system that prevents their consciousness from dying with their body, that preserves the essential self, and provides it with endless new chances. This makes their condition uniquely positioned between life and death. They are alive in the sense that they possess consciousness, agency, and physical form. They are dead in the sense that their original bodies from before the calling back are long since dust, and they've likely inhabited dozens or hundreds of replacement bodies since returning to the lands between. They are neither in the sense that what makes them who they are, their consciousness and identity, has never truly died at all. The lands between hosts several different supernatural states that challenge conventional understanding of life and death. To properly assess the nature of Tarnished resurrection, we must compare it with other forms of undeath and unusual existence found throughout Elden Ring's world. Perhaps the most significant comparison is with those who live in death, a category of beings that provides stark contrast to the Tarnished experience, while illuminating crucial differences in how various forms of resurrection and undeath function. Those who live in death represent one of the most distinctive and tragic supernatural phenomena in the lands between. These skeletal creatures arose as a consequence of the Night of Black Knives and the subsequent spread of Deathroot from Godwyn, the Golden's corrupted corpse. When Godwyn was killed in soul but not in body, his half-death created a spreading contamination that prevented normal souls from being properly processed by the Erdtree. The fundamental mechanism behind those who live in death relates to the corruption that spreads from Godwyn's body, which grows like a malignant tumor beneath the Erdtree's roots. Because Godwyn died in soul, but his body continues to exist in a state of undeath, he became a source of death corruption that affects the normal soul recycling system. When people die near areas contaminated by this death route, their souls become trapped in a liminal state. Unlike normal death, which under Marika's system would result in souls returning to the Erdtree for processing and eventual rebirth, those who live in death exist in a state between life and death, rejected by the Golden Order and unable to find peace. Their souls are neither properly alive nor properly dead, trapped in skeletal remains that persist in the world, but possess no true vitality. The fundamental difference between those who live in death and Tarnished resurrection lies in their relationship to the established cosmic order. Those who live in death represent a corruption or failure of the normal death processing system. They are aberrations, mistakes, consequences of a cosmic wound that the Golden Order cannot heal. Their very existence is anathema to the Erdtree and the principles that govern the lands between. Tarnished resurrection, by contrast, represents a functioning component of the cosmic order, albeit one that operates according to special rules. While those who live in death are rejected by the Golden Order and actively hunted by its agents like D, Hunter of the Dead, Tarnished are embraced by the system and supported by its infrastructure. The grace that enables Tarnished resurrection is explicitly a blessing of the Golden Order, while the condition of those who live in death is seen as an abomination to be eliminated. The physical manifestations of these different states reveal important distinctions. Those who live in death appear as skeletal creatures, their flesh long since decayed, maintaining animation through supernatural corruption alone. They are clearly deceased in any conventional sense. Their bones are exposed. They wear the remnants of burial clothes or armor. They emerged from graves or catacombs. Yet they move and act with purpose, driven by some force that animates dead remains. Tarnished, meanwhile, maintain their full physical form and appearance, showing no signs of decay or obvious undeath. They eat, breathe, bleed when wounded, and appear fully alive in every conventional sense. A Tarnished walking through a town would be indistinguishable from any living person, while a skeleton warrior would be immediately recognizable as something wrong, something that violates natural order. The resurrection mechanics also differ dramatically between these states. Those who live in death can return from destruction when struck down, but their resurrection is crude and automatic. Destroy a skeletal warrior, and it will reanimate after a short period, unless its bones are completely destroyed or sanctified with holy energy. This resurrection appears to be an uncontrolled response to their corrupted state, rather than a sophisticated process. There's no consciousness preservation, no transfer to safe locations, no restoration to perfect condition. The skeleton simply pulls itself back together where it fell, rising again from the same bones that were scattered moments before. If you watch carefully, you can see the bones shifting and reassembling, drawing back together through some magnetic supernatural force. Tarnished resurrection, as we've explored extensively, involves a complex process of consciousness preservation and body reconstruction, facilitated by the Grace Network. It's selective, controlled, and maintains perfect continuity of identity and memory. The Tarnished who rises at a site of grace is precisely the same person who fell in battle, with all their knowledge and experiences intact. The contrast couldn't be sharper. One represents crude, automatic reanimation of corrupted remains, while the other involves sophisticated supernatural technology that preserves the complete person. The relationship to pain and suffering also distinguishes these states dramatically. Those who live in death seem to exist in a constant state of anguish, driven by unresolved attachments to life and unable to find the peace that proper death would provide. Their movements are often jerky and unnatural, suggesting torment rather than purposeful animation. Characters like Fear and Rogier, who sympathize with their plight, describe them as suffering beings worthy of compassion. The sounds those who live in death make, their groans, their rattling bones, their anguished cries, all suggest creatures in pain. Even their aggressive behavior seems driven more by torment than by true hostility. They attack the living perhaps out of resentment, jealousy, or simply because their corrupted state compels them to spread the death they carry. Tarnished, by contrast, appear to experience no particular suffering from their resurrection ability. While the challenges they face are certainly difficult, and the experience of dying is presumably unpleasant, their supernatural state doesn't seem to cause them direct torment. If anything, the ability to return from death might reduce suffering by eliminating the fear of permanent loss that motivates much mortal anxiety. The Tarnished can pursue their goals with confidence, knowing that failure and death are temporary setbacks rather than permanent endings. This psychological freedom represents a profound advantage that transforms the nature of their journey. They can take risks, attempt impossible challenges, learn from mistakes without ultimate consequences. The social acceptance of these different states provides another point of comparison. Those who live in death, universally revered by adherents of the Golden Order. D. Hunter of the Dead has made it his life's mission to eliminate them. The Golden Order fundamentalists view them as corruption that must be purged. Even sympathetic characters like Rogier recognize that their existence represents a problem that needs addressing, though his proposed solution involves acceptance rather than elimination. Efforts to aid or defend those who live in death are considered heretical and dangerous. Fia's questline, which involves creating a mending rune that would legitimize those who live in death within the cosmic order, is portrayed as a radical rejection of Golden Order principles. Dee's brother attacks Fia for this heresy, viewing her work as an unforgivable violation of natural law. Tarnished, while not universally welcomed, are generally recognized as legitimate participants in the world's affairs. They can interact normally with most NPCs, conduct business, form alliances, and pursue goals without the automatic hostility that those who live in death face. Merchants sell to them, NPCs give them quests, and even those who oppose them typically do so for political reasons, rather than viewing the Tarnished themselves as abominations. The Tarnished's supernatural nature is seen as a blessing rather than a curse, marking them as chosen rather than corrupted. Characters like Melina, Hugh, and Gideon Ofnir treat the Tarnished's resurrection ability as normal and expected, a natural part of being grace-blessed rather than something horrifying or wrong. The purposes these states serve in the broader narrative also differ significantly. Those who live in death represent a problem to be solved, a corruption that threatens the stability of the cosmic order. Various questlines involve either eliminating them entirely or finding ways to integrate them into a reformed cosmic system. They're portrayed as victims of circumstances beyond their control, suffering beings trapped in an unnatural state through no fault of their own. Their existence raises moral questions about the nature of death, the ethics of the Golden Order's rigid categorization of beings, and whether those who exist outside the established order deserve compassion or elimination. Fia's questline particularly emphasizes the tragedy of their situation, presenting them as beings who deserve rest and acceptance rather than persecution. Tarnished, conversely, serve as protagonists and agents of change. They are empowered to make choices that will reshape the world, equipped with abilities designed to enable their success. Their resurrection isn't a problem to be solved, but a tool to be utilized. They're portrayed as chosen beings with important roles to play rather than unfortunate victims of cosmic dysfunction. The reversibility of these conditions provides another crucial distinction. Those who live in death can potentially be cured or released through various means. Fia's questline explores giving them proper death and peace through the creation of a mending rune of the Death Prince. The Golden Order fundamentalists seek to eliminate them entirely, purging the corruption from the lands between. Their state, while persistent and difficult to change, can theoretically be altered or ended. Various spells and incantations associated with the Golden Order can harm or repel those who live in death, specifically because they represent corruption of the natural order. Holy damage is particularly effective against them, as if the sacred power of the Erdtree actively rejects their unnatural existence. Tarnished resurrection appears to be a more fundamental and permanent modification. While individual Tarnished can lose their grace and become vulnerable to permanent death, there's no indication that they can simply choose to return to normal mortality while retaining their grace. The change appears to be deep and irreversible once grace-blessed and connected to the resurrection system. A tarnished remains in that state unless their grace is withdrawn or depleted. The role of external forces in maintaining these states also differs substantially. Those who live in death appear to be sustained by the deathroot corruption that spreads from Godwyn's corpse, growing through the Erdtree's root system like a cancer. Remove or purify this source, and their condition might theoretically be resolved, though the game doesn't provide a way to actually cleanse Godwyn's corruption entirely. Tarnished resurrection depends on the continuing function of the grace network and sites of grace. Without access to this infrastructure, the resurrection ability fails. But as long as grace remains active and sites of grace function properly, the tarnished can continue returning from death indefinitely. The system is self-sustaining once activated, requiring no ongoing intervention from Marika or other authorities. The degrees of consciousness and free will associated with these states reveal another important difference. Those who live in death seem to retain some level of consciousness and memory. They recognize threats, coordinate attacks, and pursue objectives. However, they appear driven by compulsions related to their undead state. They often attack living beings automatically and seem unable to fully control their behavior or transcend their corrupted nature. We never encounter those who live in death who speak, reason, or demonstrate complex decision-making. They exist in a degraded state where consciousness persists, but higher functions are impaired or absent. They're trapped in an existence where they're aware enough to suffer, but not free enough to escape their condition or choose different actions. Tarnished maintain complete consciousness, free will, and moral agency. Their resurrection ability doesn't appear to influence their behavior or decision-making in any direct way. They can choose to pursue any goal, make any decision they wish, form complex plans, engage in philosophical reasoning, and exercise full moral choice. Facial. Ilquirilex. Filforial. Hicklais fullest. It really frivolous. Is life roars. They're limited only by the same practical constraints that would affect any living person: physical capability, available resources, knowledge, and skill. The relationship to the broader themes of the game also distinguishes these forms of supernatural existence. Those who live in death represent the tragic consequences of imperfect solutions and the suffering that results from cosmic dysfunction. They embody themes of loss, corruption, and the need for compassion in the face of systemic failure. Their existence asks us to consider whether beings that fall outside established categories deserve destruction or deserve acceptance and integration. Godwyn's fate particularly emphasizes these themes. He was beloved, noble, and innocent of any wrongdoing, yet he became the source of a corruption that created countless suffering undead. His death was meant to destroy him completely, but the assassin's imperfect method created something worse than death, a half-death, that spread suffering rather than providing peace. Tarnished resurrection embodies different themes entirely: agency, choice, and the power to overcome seemingly impossible challenges through persistence. It represents hope and possibility rather than tragedy and suffering. The Tarnished's ability to return from death enables them to persist in the face of any obstacle, learning from each failure and eventually succeeding where others would have given up or been destroyed. The Tarnished represent the possibility of change in a stagnant world, the potential for growth through repeated trial and error, and the triumph of determination over adversity. Where those who live in death are trapped in their condition, unable to change or improve, Tarnished grow stronger with each resurrection, accumulating experience and power until they can overcome any challenge. When we consider all these factors together, it becomes clear that Tarnished resurrection and living in death represent fundamentally different relationships to mortality and the cosmic order. Those who live in death are trapped between life and death, suffering from a corruption that prevents them from finding peace. They're unwilling participants in a supernatural state that brings them only torment, rejected by the system that should care for them. Tarnished have transcended normal mortality through divine blessing, empowered to act as agents of cosmic change without the suffering typically associated with undeath. They're willing participants in a system designed to support them, blessed rather than cursed, chosen rather than corrupted. Their resurrection is clean, complete, and controlled rather than crude, painful, and automatic. This comparison reinforces the interpretation that Tarnished aren't simply undead beings, but rather living beings who have been granted access to supernatural technology that protects them from permanent death. They haven't died and become something less than human, like those who live in death. They've been equipped with divine infrastructure that prevents them from truly dying in the first place, that catches their consciousness before death can claim it and provides endless new chances to succeed. The Tarnished exist in a unique category that transcends traditional classifications of life, death, and undeath. They are more alive than those who live in death, more blessed than cursed, more functional than corrupted. Their resurrection represents the pinnacle of what supernatural existence can be when designed with care and purpose rather than arising from cosmic wounds and unintended consequences. The cosmic context surrounding the Tarnished's creation and purpose has undergone significant revision with the revelations provided in Shadow of the Erdtree, particularly regarding the nature of the Greater Will's involvement in the affairs of the lands between. To understand what the Tarnished truly are, we must examine their role within what was long believed to be the Greater Will's grand design, while also considering how recent discoveries about Metyr and the Two Fingers recontextualize this entire framework. For most of Elden Ring's narrative, the Greater Will is presented as the ultimate authority behind the Golden Order, the cosmic force that governs the lands between through its vassals and intermediaries. The Two Fingers serve as its envoys, selecting Empyreans to become gods and guiding the development of civilizations according to its mysterious plans. Within this framework, the Tarnished appeared to be instruments of the Greater Will's intention to restore order after the chaos of the Shattering. The Two Fingers at Round Table Hold explicitly endorsed the Tarnished's quest to become Elden Lord. Through Finger Reader Enia, they communicate that the Tarnished are meant to claim the great runes from the demigods, mend the Elden Ring, and restore the Golden Order. This seems to establish a clear divine mandate. The Tarnished are doing the Greater Will's work, following a cosmic plan to repair the shattered world. However, the Shadow of the Erdtree expansion has revealed that this understanding was fundamentally flawed. Metyr, the Mother of Fingers, was indeed the first envoy of the Greater Will to reach the lands between, and she is the progenitor of all Two Fingers. But crucially, as revealed through Count Ymir's questline and Metyr's remembrance, her communication with the Greater Will was severed long ago, leaving her and her offspring to operate based on outdated instructions and their own interpretations of what the Greater Will would want. Metyr herself is described as broken, abandoned, no longer receiving messages from the Greater Will that created her. Yet she continues to birth Two Fingers, continues to send them forth to guide Empyreans and civilizations, continues to act as if she still has divine authority and clear direction. But she's operating blind, improvising based on ancient memories of her original purpose. This revelation dramatically recontextualizes the Tarnished's role and purpose. Rather than being created as part of an active divine plan with clear direction from the cosmos, the resurrection of the Tarnished could represent the actions of cosmic intermediaries attempting to fulfill ancient directives without current guidance from their supposed master. The calling back of the dead Tarnished and their empowerment with grace might not reflect the Greater Will's current intentions, assuming it even maintains interest in the lands between, but rather represent Metyr and the Two Fingers attempting to resolve the crisis using the authorities and powers available to them. Instead, the calling back of the Tarnished might represent Metyr and the Two Fingers' desperate attempt to resolve the crisis of the Shattering using the tools and authorities available to them. Faced with complete breakdown of the order they were tasked with maintaining, they activated their most extreme contingency, measures that might have been prepared by Marika rather than by the Greater Will itself. The implications extend far beyond simple misunderstanding about the chain of command. If the Two Fingers have been operating without genuine Greater Will guidance for potentially millennia, then the entire Golden Order may represent a cosmic misinterpretation or improvisation. The systems of death, resurrection, and divine authority that govern the lands between might not reflect cosmic law, but rather the increasingly desperate attempts of abandoned servants to maintain order they no longer understand. Within this context, the creation and empowerment of the Tarnished takes on new significance. Rather than representing the execution of a divine master plan, the calling back of the Tarnished might represent a crisis response by entities that no longer have clear guidance about how to proceed, unable to restore order through normal channels, unable to get new instructions from their creator. Metyr and the Two Fingers activated what might have been Marika's prepared contingency plan. The diversity of Tarnished called back strongly supports an interpretation of desperation, rather than careful planning. The opening cinematic shows us several very different Tarnished, with contradictory goals and philosophies. Fear seeks to legitimize those who live in death. Goldmask pursues perfection of the existing Golden Order through philosophy. Dung Eater aims to curse all existence with the Omen Curse. This diversity suggests a scattershot approach, empowering multiple agents with different methods and hoping one succeeds, rather than a unified divine plan. This scattershot approach makes perfect sense if the entities making these decisions no longer have clear guidance about what solutions would be acceptable to their ultimate authority. Unable to determine what the greater will actually wants, unable even to contact it to ask, they empowered multiple Tarnished with different approaches, essentially crowdsourcing the solution to a cosmic crisis they can no longer understand or control. The specific powers granted to the Tarnished also reflect this interpretation of desperation and improvisation. The ability to resurrect from death repeatedly is exactly what would be needed for trial and error problem solving on a cosmic scale. If you're not sure what approach will work, if you can't predict what challenges will arise, if you have no clear divine guidance about the correct solution, then empower agents who can keep trying different methods indefinitely until something succeeds. The Tarnished's resurrection ability isn't just a blessing or gift. It's a practical necessity for their role as experimental problem solvers in a cosmic crisis. They need to be able to fail repeatedly, learn from each failure, and keep trying until they find solutions that work. This makes their deaths and resurrections not unfortunate setbacks, but essential features of their design, learning opportunities that gradually guide them toward success through pure persistence. The relationship between the Tarnished and Marika's original plan adds another layer of complexity to this analysis. Evidence throughout the game suggests that Marika had her own agenda that diverged from what the Two Fingers believed to be the Greater Will's intentions. The creation of the Tarnished through the banishment of Godfrey and his warriors appears to have been part of Marika's long-term strategy, rather than a direct command from higher authorities. Marika's words at the Church of Pilgrimage, promising to restore grace after the Tarnished's death and calling them back to brandish the Elden Ring, suggest she was planning their return from the very moment of their banishment. This was her contingency plan, her backup option if her primary dynasty failed, which she may have already known or suspected it would. Marika's actions in shattering the Elden Ring seem designed to trigger exactly the kind of crisis that would force the Two Fingers to call back the Tarnished. If Marika knew or suspected that the Two Fingers were operating without current Greater Will guidance, and as an Empyrean with direct connection to cosmic forces, she might well have known. Then she might have deliberately created a situation that would force them to activate her prepared contingency plan. Based on this interpretation, the Tarnished would be not servants of the Greater Will, but instruments of Marika's rebellion against the cosmic order. Marika could have been using the Two Fingers programming and desperate need for solutions to execute her own agenda, making the Tarnished agents of her will disguised as agents of cosmic authority. The discovery of Marika's origins as a shaman in the shadow of the Erdtree expansion adds crucial emotional context to her motivations. The revelation that her people were tortured and killed by the Hornsent, their flesh stuffed into jars to create living saints through horrific fusion rituals, provides a deeply personal motivation for virtually everything Marika does, having experienced the permanent loss of her entire people, having witnessed their torture and been powerless to prevent or reverse it. Marika may have vowed that such ultimate loss would never be possible again. The removal of Destined death from the Elden Ring ensured that death would no longer be final. The creation of the Tarnished with their resurrection abilities took this protection a step further, creating beings who could overcome even death itself through persistent return. From this perspective, the ability to return from death repeatedly would represent the ultimate protection against the kind of genocide that destroyed the Shaman village. If her people could have returned from death, as the Tarnished can, the Haunsant's torture murders would have failed. The Shamans would have risen again and again until they prevailed or escaped. By creating the Tarnished with this ability, Marika ensured that what happened to her people could never happen to anyone under her protection again. The shamanic abilities that Marika inherited, particularly the capacity for souls to meld harmoniously with others, appear to be foundational to the Grace resurrection system. The shaman's flesh could blend with other substances, allowing for unification of separate beings into harmonious wholes. This same principle, applied on a cosmic scale through divine power, might underlie the process by which tarnished consciousness can be separated from destroyed bodies and relocated to new forms. Marika didn't just rise to godhood and impose order through force. She applied her people's spiritual techniques at divine scale, creating systems of soul manipulation and consciousness preservation that enabled resurrection. The Grace Network, the Sites of Grace, the entire resurrection infrastructure might represent shamanic soul working, elevated to cosmic implementation. The role of Hugh provides additional evidence for this interpretation of Marika's true plan. Hugh, the misbegotten blacksmith imprisoned at Round Table Hold, speaks of a promise he made to Queen Marika to forge a weapon capable of killing a god. The timing and nature of this promise suggest it was made in preparation for the Tarnished's return, equipping them for battles they would need to fight. But which god was this weapon meant to kill? Hugh's dialogue suggests he was preparing to arm the Tarnished for battle against the Elden Beast itself, the living embodiment of the greater will that serves as the final boss. Marika commissioned a god-slaying weapon specifically so the Tarnished could overthrow the very cosmic force that had empowered her. This suggests that Marika always intended for the Tarnished to ultimately overthrow the greater will's influence in the lands between, replacing the existing cosmic order with something new. The Tarnished weren't meant to restore the status quo, but to fundamentally transform it, potentially freeing the lands between from external cosmic control entirely. The various endings available to the Tarnished player reflect this role as cosmic revolutionaries, rather than servants of the established order. Whether they choose to restore the Golden Order in its traditional form, replace it with something entirely new like the Age of Stars, or destroy everything with the frenzied flame, the Tarnished function as agents of fundamental change, rather than maintainers of the status quo. The Age of Stars ending, where Rani successfully removes the lands between from the influence of all outer gods, might represent the completion of Marika's original plan. By empowering agents capable of overthrowing even cosmic authorities, Marika succeeded in freeing her realm from external control. The Tarnished, working with Rani, accomplish what Marika herself could not: true independence from the greater will and all other outer gods. The Lord of Frenzied Flame ending presents the most extreme version of this interpretation. By destroying everything through the power of chaos, reducing the world to primordial flame, the Tarnished ensure that no cosmic authority could ever again impose its will on the lands between. This ending might represent Marika's ultimate contingency. If freedom cannot be achieved through reform or replacement of the cosmic order, then destruction becomes preferable to continued subjugation. The revelation about the nature of the greater will's involvement also explains some of the apparent contradictions and inefficiencies in the cosmic order. If the two fingers have been operating without clear guidance for millennia, their increasingly desperate and contradictory actions would make sense. They're improvising, trying to maintain systems they no longer understand, following protocols that may no longer be appropriate for current circumstances. The resurrection of the Tarnished represents not careful divine planning but the panicked response of abandoned servants trying to fulfill impossible directives. They've lost contact with their master. They're trying to maintain order in a cosmos that has become incomprehensible to them, and they're activating every contingency measure available in hopes that something will work. This context transforms our understanding of what the Tarnished are. Rather than being blessed servants of a cosmic authority with a clear plan, they are products of a system in crisis. empowered by entities that no longer understand their own purpose. Their resurrection abilities don't represent divine favor in the traditional sense, but desperate necessity, the tools needed to solve problems that their creators can no longer comprehend. The Tarnished thus occupy a unique position in the cosmic hierarchy. They are simultaneously products of the existing order and its greatest threat. Created by the system to preserve itself, they possess the power to fundamentally transform or destroy that same system. Their resurrection abilities enable them to persist through any challenge, ensuring they can continue trying until they succeed in whatever goal they choose. Their lack of clear allegiance to the existing order. They're not bound by the same rules as the demigods, not limited by the same restrictions as the Empyreans, not controlled by the same authorities as the Two Fingers, allows them to pursue truly revolutionary goals. They can choose to restore the Golden Order, but they can equally choose to replace it with something completely different or destroy it entirely. Understanding the Tarnished within this framework reveals them to be neither traditional heroes following a divine mandate, nor simple protagonists in a personal journey. They are cosmic wildcards, variable agents introduced into a broken system, precisely because that system has lost the ability to fix itself through normal means. Their ultimate loyalty is to their own judgment rather than to any external authority, and their resurrection abilities ensure they can pursue their chosen path regardless of opposition. This makes the question of whether the Tarnished are dead and being resurrected somewhat beside the point. What matters is not their technical relationship to mortality, but their role as agents of cosmic change. They were dead during their exile. They were resurrected and empowered with systems that prevent them from dying permanently again, and they now possess the tools necessary to reshape the world according to their own vision, rather than serving the agenda of entities that may no longer even know what they want. The Tarnished represent possibility in a world that had become static, change in a cosmos that had stagnated, and hope in a system that had abandoned hope. Their resurrection is not the point, it's merely the mechanism that enables them to fulfill their true purpose as agents of transformation in a world desperately in need of change. The interactions between the Tarnished and other characters throughout Elden Ring provide crucial insights into the nature of Tarnished resurrection and how it's perceived by the inhabitants of the lands between. These conversations, often subtle and layered with meaning typical of From Software's storytelling, reveal important details about what the Tarnished are and how their supernatural abilities function within the social and metaphysical framework of the world. One of the most telling examples comes from Sorcerer Rogier, whose own experience with death and resurrection provides a direct parallel and contrast to the player character's condition. Rogier explicitly mentions having died before, stating that he has experienced the resurrection process firsthand. This confirms that resurrection through grace is not unique to the player character, but is shared by multiple Tarnished who were called back after the shattering. However, Rogier's subsequent decline and eventual permanent death demonstrate that not all Tarnished share the same robust connection to grace that enables unlimited resurrection. His dialogue reveals crucial details about how grace-based resurrection feels from the inside and what happens when it begins to fail. Rogier speaks of growing weary, not in the physical sense of needing rest, but in a deeper, spiritual way. He describes feeling his strength ebb away, sensing that his time is running out. This isn't the typical fatigue of physical exertion, or even the exhaustion from repeated battles. It's something fundamental, a spiritual exhaustion that suggests his grace is being depleted with each resurrection he undergoes. The deathroot corruption, spreading through his body, visible in the black marks that gradually consume him, seems to interfere with his connection to grace, gradually severing the divine link that enables his resurrection. Rogier's eventual permanent death, which occurs off-screen between player visits to Roundtable Hold, confirms that the resurrection system has limits and can fail when pushed too far or corrupted by opposing forces. When we find his body lifeless, Marika comments that his spirit has departed, suggesting that this death is final in a way that previous deaths were not. The grace that had sustained him through multiple deaths finally failed, unable to preserve his consciousness against the corruption consuming him. The interactions with other Tarnished NPCs throughout the game illuminate different aspects of the resurrection phenomenon, Many speak of having lost their grace or being unable to see its guidance clearly, conditions that appear to be connected to their vulnerability to permanent death. Edgar, the master of Castle Morn, speaks of how the servants there have lost their grace, explaining their desperate and sometimes irrational behavior. Characters who have lost their grace often display a sense of resigned fatalism, understanding that they no longer possess the protection that once made them effectively immortal. This creates a sharp contrast with characters like the player who still possess robust grace. Those without grace move more carefully, avoid unnecessary risks, and speak with awareness that their next death might be their last. Barre's dialogue provides another perspective on Tarnished resurrection and the nature of grace. As a follower of Moog who has rejected the guidance of the Two Fingers, Varre represents a Tarnished who has chosen to align with different cosmic forces. His mockery of the Two Fingers and his claims about their madness suggest that he understands the resurrection system to be flawed or compromised in some way. Varre's famously condescending greeting, calling the player maidenless, and questioning their worthiness reveals that Tarnished society has hierarchies and judgments based on one's connection to grace and the systems that support it. Having a finger maiden is apparently a mark of status or legitimacy, suggesting that the resurrection system works better or more reliably with proper intermediaries to facilitate the connection. Melina's interactions with the player character reveal important details about how resurrection appears to those connected to the cosmic order. As a being who claims to have been burned and bodiless, who can appear and disappear at will, Melina would presumably be able to perceive supernatural phenomena that normal characters might miss. Her casual acceptance of the Tarnished's resurrection ability suggests that it's not unusual or surprising from her perspective. Melina never expresses shock when the player returns from death, never questions how they survived encounters that should have been fatal. She treats resurrection as an expected feature of being grace-blessed rather than a miracle or anomaly. This implies that resurrection abilities are known and understood within the cosmic hierarchy, part of the normal functioning of the grace system rather than extraordinary interventions. The dialogue with Finger Reader Enya provides official insight into how the Two Fingers view Tarnished resurrection. Enya consistently refers to the Tarnished as being given life by grace, a phrasing that suggests their existence is dependent on external divine support rather than being an inherent property. This language implies that the Tarnished are not naturally immortal, but are sustained by an active blessing that could theoretically be withdrawn. Enya speaks of the Tarnished's purpose in absolute terms, as if their resurrection ability is tied directly to their ordained role. They are meant to become Elden Lord, and their grace sustains them toward that purpose. This suggests that grace might be conditional, maintaining the Tarnished as long as they pursue appropriate goals and potentially withdrawing if they stray too far from their intended purpose. Conversations with Gideon Ofnir reveal how other Tarnished perceive the player character's exceptional abilities. Gideon, despite being highly knowledgeable and well-connected, earning the epithet, the all-knowing, consistently underestimates the player character's potential. He believes that certain demigods cannot be defeated, that certain challenges are impossible, and he's repeatedly proven wrong as the player overcomes each obstacle. This suggests that even experienced Tarnished don't fully understand the extent of what grace-based resurrection can accomplish when combined with sufficient determination. Gideon has access to vast knowledge about the lands between. He commands his own network of informants and agents, yet he fails to grasp that unlimited attempts at any challenge will eventually lead to success. The player character possesses an unusually robust connection to grace that enables persistence beyond what Gideon considers possible. The interactions with Hugh, the misbegotten blacksmith imprisoned at Round Table Hold, provide crucial context about the intended purpose of Tarnished resurrection. Hugh speaks of his mission to forge a weapon capable of killing a god, a task he associates directly with the Tarnished's quest. His dialogue suggests that the resurrection abilities of the Tarnished were specifically designed to enable them to face threats that would normally be impossible to overcome. Hugh seems to understand that the Tarnished will die repeatedly in their quest, and he sees this as expected rather than tragic. He refers to the player as "my lord" despite their repeated failures and deaths, maintaining faith that eventually they will succeed. This perspective treats death and resurrection as tools for learning and improvement, rather than as defeats to be mourned. Roderika's dialogue about spirit tuning and her ability to work with spirits and souls suggests a level of spiritual sensitivity that allows her to perceive aspects of the Tarnished's nature that others might miss. When she first arrives at Round Table Hold, she's frightened and uncertain, but she can sense the spiritual energies present in the location and in the Tarnished themselves. Her casual acceptance of supernatural phenomena and her willingness to work with spirit ashes implies that she sees the Tarnished as part of a broader category of beings that exist partially outside normal mortality. She can perceive that the Tarnished are different from ordinary humans, connected to supernatural systems in ways that grant them unusual properties. Yet she doesn't treat this as frightening or aberrant, but simply as fact. The conversations with D, Hunter of the Dead, reveal how the Golden Order's agents view Tarnished resurrection in relation to other forms of undeath. D's mission to eliminate those who live in death while accepting the Tarnished as legitimate demonstrates that the Golden Order distinguishes sharply between different types of supernatural existence. D sees those who live in death as abominations that corrupt the natural order and must be destroyed, yet he treats the Tarnished with respect, never suggesting that their resurrection ability is problematic or heretical. This distinction reveals that the Golden Order's issue isn't with resurrection itself, but with specific types of resurrection that occur outside its sanctioned systems. When D discusses his mission, he speaks of those who live in death, spreading corruption and violating the proper cycle of death and rebirth. Yet he never suggests that the Tarnished's repeated returns from death constitute a similar violation. This implies that resurrection through grace is seen as blessed and proper, while resurrection through deathroot corruption is seen as cursed and wrong. Dialogues with various merchants and ordinary NPCs throughout the game reveal how the general population perceives the Tarnished. Most seem aware that Tarnished are somehow different from normal people, marked by grace and destined for significant roles. However, they don't appear to understand the specific nature of their abilities or the mechanics of their resurrection. Merchants will sell to Tarnished, offer information, and conduct business normally, suggesting that Tarnished are accepted as legitimate members of society despite their supernatural qualities. The merchant Calais at the Church of Ele treats the player character with courtesy mixed with caution, aware that Tarnished can be dangerous but not treating them as monsters or abominations. The interactions with hostile NPCs and invading Tarnished also provide insights into how enemies perceive Tarnished resurrection. Characters like Eleonora or other invading Tarnished don't seem surprised by the player character's ability to return from death. They understand that resurrection is an expected capability among grace-blessed Tarnished, rather than a unique ability possessed only by the player. However, their continued hostility implies that they believe they can overcome this advantage through superior skill, equipment, or power. The resurrection ability doesn't make Tarnished invincible in combat, only persistent. A sufficiently skilled opponent can defeat a Tarnished repeatedly, and some hostile NPCs seem to take satisfaction in this, treating each victory as meaningful, even if they know the Tarnished will return. Conversations with the various Round Table Hold inhabitants reveal how a community of Tarnished functions when resurrection is commonplace. The casual atmosphere and long-term planning discussions suggest that the inhabitants consider resurrection to be a reliable safety net rather than an uncertain blessing. They discuss strategies for overcoming challenges with the assumption that failure is temporary and success is simply a matter of persistence. Nephili loose dialogue provides insight into how descendants of the original Tarnished view their supernatural heritage. As a warrior who claims connection to Godfrey's lineage, Nephili seems to understand that Tarnished possess special abilities blessed by grace. However, her focus on martial prowess and personal strength, rather than supernatural powers, suggests that resurrection abilities are seen as tools to enable greatness, rather than substitutes for actual capability. Nephili never speaks of relying on resurrection to overcome challenges. Instead, she focuses on becoming strong enough to not need it, treating grace as a safety net that allows one to take risks and learn from failures rather than as the primary source of power. This perspective suggests a healthy relationship with the resurrection system, appreciating its protection while not becoming dependent on it. Interactions with the various demigods reveal how cosmic-level beings perceive tarnished resurrection. When we encounter Godric, Renala, Radahn, or other demigods, they don't seem particularly concerned about our ability to return from death. Their dialogue suggests they view the Tarnished as challenges to be overcome, rather than as anomalies to be confused by. This implies that from the perspective of beings who themselves are extremely difficult to kill permanently, who have access to their own forms of supernatural resilience, resurrection is not particularly remarkable. The demigods have been fighting each other for generations without being able to achieve permanent victories. To them, another being that can return from death is simply par for the course in a world where death has lost much of its finality. The conversations with Ranni provide a unique perspective from an Empyrean who has rejected the Two Fingers and chosen her own path outside the Golden Order. Ranni's casual acceptance of the Tarnished's abilities and her willingness to work with them suggests that resurrection through grace is not tied exclusively to loyalty to the Golden Order or the Greater Will. Ranni has killed her own Two Fingers, rejecting the cosmic order they represent, yet she shows no concern about the Tarnished's connection to grace or their resurrection abilities. This implies that the supernatural systems supporting resurrection are more fundamental than the political structures built on top of them. Grace may have been instituted by the Golden Order, but it operates according to principles that transcend political allegiances. Dialogue with various spirit ashes and ghostly characters reveals how the dead perceive the Tarnished. These beings, existing in various states between life and death, often seem confused or troubled by the Tarnished's presence. They can sense that the Tarnished exist in a liminal state, neither fully alive in the conventional sense, nor properly dead like themselves. Spirits sometimes address the Tarnished with uncertainty, unable to categorize them properly. Are they living beings who will eventually join the spirits in death, or are they something else entirely, beings who exist outside the normal cycle? This confusion suggests that the Tarnished's supernatural nature places them in a category that even supernatural beings find difficult to understand. The interactions with Torrent, the spectral steed, provide a non-verbal form of evidence about Tarnished nature. Torrent's willingness to serve the Tarnished and ability to be summoned repeatedly, even after being killed in combat, suggests that the Tarnished's supernatural nature extends to their relationships with other mystical beings. The bond between Tarnished and Spirit Steed operates according to similar principles as the Grace Resurrection system. When Torrent is killed, he can be resummoned using a flask of crimson tears, essentially resurrecting him in a manner parallel to how the Tarnished resurrect at sites of grace. This parallel suggests that the supernatural framework supporting the Tarnished extends beyond just their own resurrection to encompass their tools and companions. Conversations with characters who have lost their grace reveal the psychological impact of losing access to resurrection. These individuals often display increased caution, fatalism, or desperation, suggesting that knowledge of permanent vulnerability to death fundamentally changes how one approaches life and decision-making. The contrast between their behavior and the player's often more reckless approach highlights how profoundly the resurrection ability affects worldview. Characters like the merchants who have lost their grace often speak of simply trying to survive, of avoiding danger rather than seeking challenges. They've given up on grand ambitions because without grace to protect them from permanent death, every risk becomes potentially fatal. This conservative approach contrasts sharply with the Tarnished, who still possess grace, who can afford to take risks, because failure is temporary rather than final. The dialogue with various ending-related NPCs reveals how different factions view the ultimate purpose of Tarnished resurrection. Whether working toward the Age of Stars with Ranni, the Lord of Frenzied Flame ending with the Three Fingers, or other conclusions, these characters treat the Tarnished's supernatural abilities as tools for achieving cosmic-level change rather than ends in themselves. Shabriri, the manifestation of the frenzied flame that possesses Yura's body, speaks of the Tarnished's potential to burn away the world and all its suffering. He treats their resurrection ability as perfect for this purpose. They can withstand the frenzied flame's corruption long enough to reach the Erdtree and set everything ablaze. Their persistence through death makes them ideal vessels for cosmic destruction. When examined collectively, these character interactions paint a picture of tarnished resurrection as a known but exceptional supernatural phenomenon. It's accepted as real by those who understand the cosmic order, understood to be connected to grace and the Erdtree systems, but its specific mechanics remain mysterious even to those who experience it firsthand. The general consensus among characters seems to be that the Tarnished exist in a unique supernatural state that grants them extraordinary capabilities while maintaining their essential humanity and agency. They're neither fully mortal nor fully divine, neither completely alive nor remotely dead, but something in between beings who have been granted access to systems that transcend normal mortality while retaining the freedom to choose their own path. This evidence from character interactions supports the interpretation that the Tarnished are not simply undead or immortal beings, but rather living individuals who have been granted access to supernatural systems that protect them from permanent death. Their resurrection abilities are recognized as real and significant by other characters, but they're also understood to be conditional and dependent on maintaining their connection to the forces that grant them this protection. The way other characters treat the Tarnished, with respect rather than fear, as chosen rather than cursed, as agents of change rather than abominations, reveals that their supernatural state is fundamentally different from cursed undeath or corruption. They occupy a blessed position within the cosmic order, empowered rather than diminished by their relationship with death and resurrection. The shadow of the Erdtree expansion has fundamentally transformed our understanding of Elden Ring's cosmology and the forces that govern life, death, and resurrection in the lands between. The revelations about Queen Marika's origins, the true nature of the Two Fingers' relationship with the Greater Will, and the discovery of the Shaman village provide crucial new context for understanding what the Tarnished are and how their resurrection abilities function within the broader cosmic framework. Perhaps the most significant revelation comes from the discovery of Metyr, Mother of Fingers, and the truth about the Two Fingers' relationship with the Greater Will. Throughout the base game, the Two Fingers were presented as active conduits to the Greater Will, cosmic authorities that could communicate directly with the ultimate divine power and channel its will into the lands between. This understanding formed the foundation for the entire Golden Order's claim to legitimacy. However, Count Ymir's questline and the encounter with Metyr herself reveal a devastating truth. Communication between Metyr and the Greater Will was severed long ago. Metyr is described as broken, abandoned, no longer receiving the messages or guidance from the cosmic entity that created her. Despite this severed connection, she continues to birth Two Fingers and send them forth to guide Empyreans and civilizations, continues to act as if she still has divine authority and clear direction. But she's operating blind, improvising based on ancient memories of her original purpose. The Two Fingers throughout the lands between aren't following current divine guidance. They're following outdated programming, ancient directives that may no longer be relevant or appropriate. They believe themselves to be channeling the Greater Will's intentions, but in reality, they're simply interpreting what they think the Greater Will would want based on incomplete information and centuries-old instructions. This revelation completely recontextualizes the resurrection of the Tarnished and their empowerment with grace, rather than representing the execution of a current divine plan with clear direction from the cosmos itself. The calling back of the Tarnished might represent the actions of cosmic entities operating without guidance, desperately trying to fulfill their original mandate, despite no longer understanding what that mandate truly means. The Two Fingers' decision to resurrect the Tarnished and grant them seemingly unlimited resurrection abilities might not reflect divine wisdom or a carefully considered plan. It might represent improvisation, a crisis response by abandoned servants trying to resolve the shattering using whatever tools they have available, activating contingency measures without fully understanding their implications or proper context for their use. The discovery of Marika's origins in the Shaman village provides another crucial piece of the puzzle. The revelation that Marika was originally one of the Shamans, a people whose flesh could meld harmoniously with others, suggests that her ability to create the Grace Network and enable Tarnished resurrection might have been rooted in shamanic spiritual techniques, rather than purely divine authority granted by the Greater Will. The Shaman village itself stands as a monument to tragedy, We find evidence throughout the Shadow Realm that the shamans were peaceful people with unique spiritual gifts. Their flesh could blend with other substances and beings, allowing for harmonious fusion and union. This ability made them valuable to the Haunsant, but in the most horrific way imaginable. The Haunsant captured shamans and subjected them to torture, stuffing their living flesh into jars along with the flesh of other beings to create jar saints, artificial holy beings, formed through forced fusion of multiple people. The process was agonizing and destructive, killing the shamans while exploiting their unique properties to create beings the Haunsant considered sacred. Marika survived this genocide, one of the few, perhaps the only shaman to escape the jar rituals. The trauma of watching her entire people tortured and killed, their unique spiritual gifts turned against them in the most grotesque manner, would have been incomprehensible. Everyone she knew, everyone she loved, her entire culture and way of life was destroyed, and there was nothing she could do to bring them back. This context transforms our understanding of almost everything Marika does subsequently. The removal of Destined death from the Elden Ring takes on new meaning when we understand it as a response to this trauma. Having experienced the ultimate loss, the permanent, irrevocable death of her entire people, Marika may have vowed that such final endings would never be possible again. By removing Destined death and creating the Erdtree's soul recycling system, Marika ensured that death would no longer mean permanent loss. People could die, but their souls would return to the tree, be processed, and eventually return to the world. The permanent extinction that befell the shamans would be impossible under this new system. The creation of the Tarnished with their resurrection abilities represents an even more direct response to her trauma. If the shamans could have returned from death as the Tarnished can, the Haunsant's genocide would have failed. No matter how many times the shamans were killed and stuffed into jars, they would have risen again at sites of grace, able to keep fighting, keep escaping, keep resisting until they prevailed. The Tarnished's resurrection ability is Marika's answer to the question that must have haunted her. How do I prevent what happened to my people from ever happening again? The answer: create beings who cannot be permanently killed, who will rise again no matter how many times they fall, who possess such persistent resilience that no enemy can truly defeat them. The shamanic abilities that Marika inherited appear to be foundational to how the Grace resurrection system operates. The shaman's capacity for souls to meld harmoniously with others, for flesh to blend and fuse, could be the underlying technique that enables consciousness to be separated from destroyed bodies and relocated to new forms. When a Tarnished dies and resurrects at a site of grace, the process might involve shamanic soul-working techniques. Scaled up to divine implementation, the consciousness is separated from the dying body, a form of soul extraction, preserved through the grace network using the shaman's capacity for harmonious melding, and fused with a new physical form at the site of grace, applying the blending technique to create a new body housing the preserved consciousness. Marika's pilgrimage back to the Shaman village, revealed through the minor Erdtree at that location, adds another layer of emotional depth. We discover that Marika returned to her destroyed homeland at some point and bathed it in healing golden light, despite knowing there was no one left to heal. This gesture reveals the emotional core of all her subsequent actions. Everything she did, from removing Destined death to creating the Tarnished, was motivated by grief and a determination to prevent others from experiencing the loss she endured. The revelation about the true nature of the Jar Saints and their connection to shamanic practices provides horrifying context for understanding what Marika survived. The Haunsant stuffed living shamans into jars, their flesh melding with the flesh of others, creating composite beings through forced fusion. This process exploited the shaman's unique properties in the most grotesque manner imaginable, turning their gift for harmonious union into a tool for creating artificial saints through torture. Understanding this context helps explain Marika's crusade against the Haunsant, conducted in secret through her son Metyr. This wasn't simple conquest or political expansion, it was vengeance for genocide. Metyr's war in the Shadow Realm was Marika's retribution against the civilization that destroyed her people, an attempt to ensure they could never do to anyone else what they did to the shamans. The connection between shamanic soul-melding abilities and the advanced spiritual technology of the Golden Order suggests that Marika's greatest achievement was not simply becoming a god, but rather applying her people's spiritual techniques on a cosmic scale. The Grace Network, the resurrection systems, the entire infrastructure of the Golden Order might represent shamanic practices elevated to divine implementation. If we consider the shaman's abilities as a form of spiritual technology techniques for manipulating souls and consciousness, then Marika essentially reverse-engineered and scaled up these techniques using divine power. She took the intimate, personal magic of her people and transformed it into cosmic infrastructure capable of affecting the entire lands between. The sites of grace might be locations where Marika wove together divine power, Erdtree infrastructure, and shamanic soul working to create anchor points capable of preserving consciousness and reconstructing bodies. The Grace Network itself might function using principles derived from shamanic soul melding, adapted to allow consciousness to travel through the network and reunite with new physical forms. The shadow of the Erdtree expansion also reveals additional details about resurrection infrastructure through its introduction of the Erdtree system. The Erdtree appears to be the shadow or complement of the Erdtree, representing aspects of existence that the Golden Order sought to suppress or control. Yet it provides similar functionality, power enhancement, and serving as rally points, suggesting that resurrection technology is not unique to Marika's system. The parallel between the Erdtree and Erdtree systems implies that the underlying principles of resurrection are universal rather than specific to the Golden Order. Multiple cosmic entities or forces might be capable of creating resurrection infrastructure using similar techniques applied through different divine authorities. The technology isn't exclusive to Marika or the Greater Will, but represents applications of fundamental cosmic principles that can be implemented in various ways. This understanding suggests that Marika didn't invent resurrection from nothing, but rather discovered and applied principles that existed prior to her ascension. The shaman's soul-working techniques might themselves have been based on these fundamental cosmic principles, allowing Marika to scale them up once she gained access to divine power. The revelation about Metyr and his role as Marika's hidden son, conducting a secret crusade in the Shadow Realm, provides additional context for understanding Marika's long-term planning. Metyr's war against the Hornsent was conducted in secret, concealed behind the veil that separates the lands between from the Shadow Realm. This suggests that Marika's creation of the Tarnished was part of a multi-generational plan involving multiple hidden agents and contingencies. The Tarnished might represent just one element of a complex strategy that spanned centuries and involved numerous prepared contingencies. Marika wasn't simply reacting to immediate threats. She was preparing for scenarios that might unfold generations or even millennia in the future, setting up systems and agents that could activate when needed. The discovery that Metyr was granted the task of burning away the Shadow Realm to seal away the evidence of Marika's origins and her vengeance reveals how thoroughly she planned to conceal her true nature and motivations. By hiding the Shadow Realm and her past, Marika ensured that the Golden Order would appear to have divine legitimacy unconnected to personal vengeance or traumatic origins. The revelation about the nature of the serpent within Metyr and its connection to the base serpent provides insight into how supernatural entities can be contained within living beings. Metyr carries a serpent sealed within him, a force that constantly threatens to consume him, but that he controls through Marika's seal. This mechanism of binding cosmic forces within physical forms might be similar to how grace and resurrection abilities are embedded within the Tarnished. The Tarnished might not simply have access to grace as an external blessing, but might have grace bound to them in a manner similar to how the serpent is bound to Metyr. This would explain why grace cannot be easily withdrawn once granted. It's been woven into their very being through shamanic soul-working techniques, becoming part of their fundamental nature rather than remaining an external blessing. Ultimately, the shadow of the Erdtree expansion reveals that the Tarnished's resurrection abilities are not divine gifts granted by a wise and all-knowing greater will. They are sophisticated applications of shamanic spiritual technology, implemented by a goddess, motivated by profound personal loss, operated by cosmic entities that have lost contact with their supposed divine authority, and functioning according to principles that predate the Golden Order itself. This context makes the Tarnished's choices and actions even more significant. They are not puppets of divine will executing a predetermined plan. They are inheritors of Marika's attempt to create beings who could overcome any challenge, including death itself, in a cosmos where the original authorities have abandoned their posts or never truly cared in the first place. The Tarnished's resurrection is the technical implementation of a mother's desperate desire to ensure that what happened to her people permanent, irrevocable loss through genocide could never happen to anyone else. Their ability to return from death repeatedly represents Marika's answer to ultimate tragedy. If we cannot prevent loss entirely, we can at least ensure that loss is never final, that there's always another chance, always hope for return. Understanding this transforms the question of whether the Tarnished are dead and being resurrected into a deeper inquiry about the nature of love, loss, and the lengths to which someone will go to protect others from experiencing ultimate tragedy. The Tarnished are not simply game characters with a convenient respawn mechanic. They are the embodiment of one woman's refusal to accept that death must be final, that loss must be permanent, that genocide must succeed. After this extensive exploration through the deepest corners of Elden Ring's lore, examining everything from the fundamental nature of death in the lands between to the tragic origins of Queen Marika in the Shaman village, we can now provide a comprehensive answer to our central question. Are the Tarnished actually dead and being resurrected, or is something else entirely happening? The evidence suggests a complex answer that transcends traditional categories of life, death, and undeath. The Tarnished appear to exist in a unique supernatural state that combines elements of both life and death, while ultimately being neither in the conventional sense. They represent something altogether different from traditional resurrection narratives, living beings who have been equipped with sophisticated supernatural systems that prevent them from experiencing true death by preserving their consciousness when their physical form is destroyed. The opening narration's description of the Tarnished as ye dead who yet live proves to be literally accurate in multiple layers. First, the Tarnished were indeed physically dead during their exile from the lands between. They lived full lives in foreign lands after the long march, aged, died through natural causes or in battle, and remained dead for potentially centuries or even millennia. Their bodies turned to dust, their names forgotten, their stories seemingly concluded. Then, when Queen Marika's contingency plan was activated after the shattering, these dead Tarnished were called back to life through a mass resurrection event that restored not just their grace but their very existence. This was not a metaphorical awakening or spiritual calling, it was literal resurrection of the dead, bringing back to life those who had long since passed from the world. However, this initial resurrection appears to have been just the beginning of their transformation. Upon their return to the lands between, the Tarnished were connected to a supernatural system that fundamentally altered their relationship with mortality. They became participants in the Grace Network, a sophisticated infrastructure that monitors their condition and intervenes to prevent permanent death. When a Tarnished receives fatal damage, the Grace system activates instantly, extracting their consciousness at the moment of physical destruction and transferring it to the nearest site of grace, where they are provided with a completely restored physical form. This process maintains perfect continuity of identity and memory, while the damaged original body is essentially discarded, left where it fell with its accumulated runes. This makes the Tarnished's condition unique and difficult to categorize using traditional concepts. They are dead in the sense that their original bodies from before the calling back are long gone, and they likely inhabit dozens or hundreds of replacement bodies created at sites of grace throughout their journey. Each time they fall in battle, that particular physical form dies and is abandoned, yet they are living in the sense that their consciousness never experiences true death. There's no gap in awareness, no void of non-existence, no journey to an afterlife and back. Their consciousness is preserved throughout what appears to be death, transferred seamlessly from dying body to restored body at a site of grace. They possess agency, free will, the ability to learn and grow, all characteristics of living beings. The Tarnished don't repeatedly die and come back to life in the traditional sense implied by most resurrection narratives. Instead, they repeatedly have their consciousness rescued from death at the last possible moment and provided with new physical vessels. This is neither conventional death nor conventional life, but rather a form of existence that transcends both through technological rather than mystical means. The infrastructure supporting this existence, the Grace Network, the Sites of Grace, the Erdtree's root system, represents sophisticated supernatural technology derived from shamanic soul-working techniques scaled up to divine implementation. Marika took the intimate spiritual practices of her people, their ability to meld souls and blend flesh harmoniously, and transformed these techniques into cosmic infrastructure capable of preserving consciousness and reconstructing bodies on demand. This technology was created with specific emotional motivations stemming from Marika's trauma. Having experienced the permanent, irrevocable loss of her entire people to the Hornsons genocide, Marika designed systems specifically to prevent such final endings from ever being possible again. The Tarnished's resurrection ability represents the ultimate expression of this determination: beings who cannot be permanently destroyed, who will rise again no matter how many times they fall. The revelation that the Two Fingers and Metyr have been operating without current guidance from the greater will adds another dimension to our understanding. The Tarnished's resurrection might not represent the execution of an active divine plan, but rather the activation of contingency measures by cosmic entities that no longer have clear direction. This makes the Tarnished's agency and choices even more significant. They're not fulfilling a predetermined divine mandate, but exercising free will within systems designed to enable their success. The diversity of Tarnished called back, each with different goals and philosophies, supports this interpretation of improvisation rather than careful planning. By empowering multiple Tarnished with contradictory objectives, the cosmic authorities essentially crowdsourced solutions to a crisis they could no longer understand or control. The resurrection ability enables each Tarnished to persist indefinitely, trying different approaches until something succeeds. Comparing Tarnished resurrection to other supernatural states in the lands between, particularly those who live in death, reveals crucial distinctions. Those who live in death represent corruption and failure, crude reanimation of remains through deathroot contamination. They suffer, they're rejected by the cosmic order, their resurrection is automatic and uncontrolled. Tarnished resurrection is sophisticated and purposeful, preserving complete identity while providing fresh bodies, blessed rather than cursed, controlled rather than automatic. The Tarnished maintain full agency and consciousness, while those who live in death seem trapped in degraded states. This comparison reinforces that Tarnished are not undead in any traditional sense, but rather living beings with access to advanced resurrection technology. The dependence on grace and sites of grace reveals that this resurrection is not an inherent property of the Tarnished, but access to external systems. Characters like Rogier who lose their grace connection eventually face permanent death when the system can no longer support them. This suggests that the Tarnished supernatural state is maintained through ongoing connection to divine infrastructure rather than through any inherent immortality. The mechanics of how resurrection actually works: instant consciousness transfer, perfect body reconstruction, selective preservation of identity and equipment, while abandoning runes all point to a sophisticated process that goes far beyond simple revival of the dead. The Tarnished aren't corpses being repeatedly reanimated, but consciousness being continuously preserved and relocated to fresh vessels. The ultimate purpose of the Tarnished becomes clear when viewed within this framework. They are agents of potential cosmic transformation, equipped with tools necessary to overcome any challenge through unlimited persistence. Their resurrection ability isn't a reward for faithful service, but a practical necessity for their role as problem solvers in a cosmic crisis where the original authorities no longer understand the problems or possess clear solutions. The various endings available to the Tarnished reflect this role as agents of change rather than servants of the established order. Whether restoring the Golden Order, replacing it with the Age of Stars, destroying everything with the Frenzied Flame, or pursuing other conclusions, the Tarnished function as wild cards empowered to reshape cosmic order according to their own judgment. This makes the question, are the Tarnished dead and being resurrected, somewhat beside the larger point about their nature and purpose. What matters is not their technical relationship to mortality, but their role as agents empowered to reshape the cosmos while being protected from permanent death through sophisticated spiritual technology. The Tarnished represent what might happen when love and loss drive cosmic-scale innovation, when a goddess traumatized by genocide creates systems specifically designed to prevent such final, irrevocable loss from ever occurring again. They are the technical implementation of a refusal to accept that death must be final, that loss must be permanent, that failure must be the end. In the end, the Tarnished embody themes that resonate throughout all of From Software's work. The struggle against seemingly impossible odds, the power of persistence in the face of repeated failure, and the ultimate triumph of individual agency over cosmic determinism. Their ability to return from death, repeatedly, isn't just a gameplay mechanic, but a thematic statement about the power of determination to overcome any obstacle, including mortality itself. As you venture forth in the lands between, remember that every death you suffer and every resurrection you experience is not just a return to life, but a testament to one goddess's determination that no one should ever again face the irreversible loss she endured. You are not the dead returned to life, but the living equipped with the ultimate protection against loss, the power to try again, to persist, and ultimately to choose your own fate in a cosmos that has forgotten its own purpose. The Tarnished are Marika's answer to tragedy, persistence embodied in divine technology, hope given form through shamanic soul-working scaled to cosmic proportions. They are simultaneously dead and alive, mortal and immortal, blessed and cursed with the burden of unlimited chances in a world where most beings get only one. Understanding this nature transforms how we view the entire journey through the lands between. Every enemy encountered, every boss defeated, every area explored becomes part of a larger narrative about overcoming impossible odds through sheer determination. The Tarnished's resurrection ability is what makes this journey possible, what allows ordinary individuals to challenge gods and demigods and eventually succeed where entire armies failed. The psychological implications of this existence are profound. Living with the knowledge that death is not final, that every failure is merely a learning opportunity, that unlimited attempts will eventually lead to success. This fundamentally changes the nature of struggle and achievement. The Tarnished can take risks that would be insane for mortals, can learn from mistakes that would permanently destroy others, can persist through challenges that would break anyone who faced permanent consequences for failure. Yet this blessing comes with its own form of burden. The Tarnished cannot give up, cannot accept defeat, cannot choose the peace of final rest without losing their grace entirely. They are locked into a cycle of death and return until they either achieve their purpose or lose the grace that sustains them. This makes their journey both empowered and compelled, both blessed with infinite chances and burdened with the responsibility to continue trying until they succeed or fail permanently. The social and ethical implications of Tarnished resurrection also deserve consideration. In a world where most beings face permanent death, the Tarnished possess an extraordinary privilege that sets them apart from normal inhabitants of the lands between. This creates a fundamental inequality. The Tarnished can afford to be bold, reckless, experimental in ways that others cannot. They can learn through trial and error, while others must get things right the first time or face permanent consequences. This privilege carries responsibility. The Tarnished's unlimited chances are not given purely for personal benefit, but to enable them to make choices that will affect the entire cosmos. Their resurrection ability is meant to enable them to overcome challenges that serve larger purposes, to reshape the world in ways that benefit more than just themselves. The endings they can achieve, restoring order, creating new systems, destroying everything, all have cosmic implications far beyond their personal journey. The mystery of why some Tarnished possess more robust grace than others remains partially unexplained. Why can the player character resurrect seemingly unlimited times while Rogier's grace fails after relatively few deaths? Is it a matter of spiritual strength, divine favor, purity of purpose, or simply random variation in how grace manifests? The game provides no clear answer, leaving this as one of the enduring mysteries of the Tarnished condition. One possibility is that grace strength correlates with alignment to one's destined purpose. The player character, being the Tarnished meant to become Elden Lord, might possess exceptionally strong grace because their purpose is so significant. Other Tarnished with less crucial roles or whose purposes have been fulfilled might possess weaker grace that depletes more quickly. Another interpretation suggests that grace responds to will and determination. The player character's relentless pursuit of goals, their refusal to give up despite countless deaths, might strengthen their grace through sheer force of will. Conversely, Tarnished who lose hope, who question their purpose, who waver in determination, might find their grace weakening as a result. The corruption factor also cannot be ignored. Rogier's grace fails specifically as deathroot corruption spreads through his body, suggesting that exposure to forces opposing the Golden Order can damage or deplete grace. The player character's ability to resist such corruption, to cleanse it or avoid significant exposure, might explain why their grace remains robust when others fails. The role of Melina as Finger Maiden substitute raises additional questions about grace maintenance. Does having a proper maiden strengthen grace or make resurrection more efficient? Melina's ability to convert runes into strength at sites of grace suggests that maidens serve as interfaces or facilitators for the grace system. The player character's connection to Melina might contribute to their exceptionally strong grace, providing support and stability that other maidenless Tarnished lack. The broader implications of the Tarnished's existence extend beyond their individual journeys. They represent a fundamental challenge to the natural order, beings who exist outside normal cycles of life and death. Their presence in the lands between introduces an element of chaos and unpredictability into systems designed for stability and control. This might be precisely why Marika created them, to introduce agents of change into an order that had become stagnant and self-perpetuating. The Tarnished's ability to choose their own ending, to determine the fate of the Elden Ring, and by extension the entire cosmic order, represents the ultimate expression of their agency. They are not bound by destiny in the way that Empyreans are, not limited by cosmic law in the way that demigods are. Their status as outsiders called back from death gives them freedom that beings native to the lands between do not possess. This freedom carries existential weight. The Tarnished must choose not just their own fate, but the fate of an entire world. Will they restore the Golden Order in its traditional form, maintaining systems that have persisted for millennia? Will they reform it according to new principles like Goldmask's perfect order or the Duskborn ending? Will they replace it entirely with something radically different like the Age of Stars? Or will they destroy everything with the frenzied flame, reducing the world to chaos and flame? Each choice reflects different interpretations of what the Tarnished are meant to be and do. Restoring the Golden Order suggests they were always meant to be servants of the existing system, tools for its restoration. Reforming or replacing it suggests they were meant to be agents of evolution, adapting the cosmic order to new circumstances. Destroying everything suggests they were meant to be cosmic reset buttons, capable of ending cycles that have become irredeemably corrupted. The fact that all these options are available, that the Tarnished can pursue any of them successfully, suggests that their ultimate purpose is not predetermined. They were given the tools resurrection through grace, guidance toward goals, power to overcome challenges, but the ultimate use of those tools was left to their own judgment. This makes them truly free agents in a world where most beings are bound by cosmic forces beyond their control. The philosophical implications of Tarnished resurrection touch on fundamental questions about identity and continuity. If a Tarnished dies and is reconstructed at a site of grace, is the being that awakens truly the same person who died? The continuity of consciousness suggests yes. There's no gap in awareness, no loss of memory or identity, but the physical body is completely new, reconstructed from divine energy or shamanic techniques rather than being the original flesh. This recalls ancient thought experiments about identity and change. If a ship has every plank replaced over time, is it still the same ship? If a person's body is completely destroyed and perfectly reconstructed, are they still the same person? The Tarnished's experience suggests that consciousness and memory are what define identity rather than physical continuity. The self persists even as the body is repeatedly replaced. This has implications for understanding the nature of the soul in Elden Ring's cosmology. The soul or consciousness appears to be a discrete, preservable entity that can be separated from the body and relocated to new physical forms. This supports interpretations of the Erdtree's soul recycling system as literal processing and redistribution of conscious entities rather than simply dissipation and reformation. The Tarnished's relationship with memory is particularly significant. They remember every death, every failure, every lesson learned through trial and error. This accumulated experience becomes their greatest weapon, not physical strength or magical power, but knowledge gained through unlimited opportunities to learn. They can study enemy patterns, discover hidden paths, understand complex mechanics precisely because they can afford to fail and try again. This makes the Tarnished's journey fundamentally different from traditional hero narratives. They don't succeed through inherent superiority, prophecy, or destiny. They succeed through persistence, through learning from failures that would permanently destroy others, through the gradual accumulation of knowledge and skill that only unlimited attempts can provide. They are heroes of perseverance, rather than heroes of inherent greatness. The emotional toll of this existence remains largely unexplored in the game but deserves consideration. What is it like to die hundreds or thousands of times, to experience the moment of death repeatedly, to carry the memory of each failure? Does it become routine, losing its terror through familiarity? Or does each death retain its horror, making the Tarnished's persistence even more impressive? The game provides no clear answer, leaving this to player interpretation. Some might imagine the Tarnished becoming numb to death, treating it as a minor inconvenience, rather than a traumatic experience. Others might envision them carrying the psychological weight of each death, persisting despite accumulating trauma rather than because they're unbothered by it. The relationship between the Tarnished and the world they're trying to save or reshape also deserves reflection. They are outsiders, exiles called back from distant lands, strangers to the current state of the lands between. They have no personal history with most of the characters and locations they encounter, no emotional investment in the conflicts between demigods or the struggles of various factions. This outsider status gives them perspective that natives might lack. They can see the lands between's problems clearly, precisely, because they're not emotionally invested in maintaining existing systems or protecting particular factions. Their ability to choose endings that natives might find unthinkable, like burning everything with the frenzied flame, stems from their fundamental disconnection from the world they've been called to reshape. Yet this same disconnection raises questions about their right to make such choices. Should beings who have been absent for generations, who have no personal stake in the world's current condition, be the ones deciding its ultimate fate? The game doesn't judge the Tarnished's authority to make these choices, but the question lingers in the background of every ending. The legacy of the Tarnished extends beyond their individual achievements. They represent proof that the impossible can be overcome, that cosmic powers can be challenged, that determined individuals can reshape reality itself. Whether they restore order or bring chaos, their journey demonstrates that agency and persistence can triumph over seemingly insurmountable odds. Future generations in the lands between, whatever form the world takes after the Tarnished's choices, will remember that a dead exile was called back to life, granted the power to return from death repeatedly, and used that power to reshape the cosmos. This memory carries both inspiration and warning: inspiration that change is possible, warning that change can be radical and destructive. The Tarnished story is ultimately about transformation through persistence, about overcoming death itself to achieve goals that matter. Whether those goals are noble or destructive, selfless or selfish, the journey remains the same. Die, learn, rise, try again, and eventually succeed through sheer determination and unlimited chances. So when we ask, are the Tarnished actually dead and being resurrected? The complete answer is, they were dead during their exile and were resurrected to return to the lands between. Upon returning, they were connected to systems that prevent them from dying permanently again by preserving their consciousness and providing new bodies at sites of grace. They repeatedly experience physical death, but their consciousness never truly dies, making them beings who exist between life and death, neither fully mortal nor truly undead, but something unique and unprecedented. They are the dead who yet live, not as a paradox but as literal description of beings who died once and now live while being protected from dying again. They are Queen Marika's answer to the ultimate question posed by tragedy. How do we prevent loss from being final? The answer embodied in the Tarnished is, we create beings who can lose everything, even their bodies, yet never lose themselves, never face final endings, never succumb to permanent defeat. The Tarnished are persistence made flesh, determination given form, hope embodied in beings who cannot be permanently destroyed. They are proof that in a world where death has lost its finality, where cosmic orders rise and fall, where gods themselves can be challenged, the only thing that truly matters is the refusal to give up. As you rest at the next site of grace, as you prepare for another attempt at whatever challenge awaits, remember what you truly are. Not simply a player character with a convenient respawn mechanic, but a being crafted through tragedy and love, empowered by shamanic soul working scaled to divine proportions, protected by systems designed specifically to prevent the kind of permanent loss that destroyed an entire people. You are tarnished. You are dead who yet live. You are persistence incarnate. And you will rise, again and again, until your purpose is fulfilled or the grace that sustains you finally fails. This is your nature, your blessing, your burden, and your ultimate gift to a world that desperately needs someone willing to keep trying when everyone else has given up. Rise now, tarnished. Ye dead who yet live. The call of long-lost grace speaks to us all, and you have answered it not once but countless times, with each death and each resurrection, with each failure and each attempt, with each ending and each beginning. You are what Marika created to ensure that loss need never be final, and in that creation, you have become something unprecedented in the cosmos, beings who transcend death itself through the power of persistence and the grace that will not let you fall into final darkness. This is what the Tarnished truly are. Love's answer to loss, hope's response to tragedy, and life's defiance of death's claim to finality. We are the dead who live, and we will continue living, dying, and rising until the world is remade according to our choice, or until grace itself abandons us to the permanent end we have so long defied.